Welcome back, my friend. Before we start the video, I really need your support. The channel is going through a tough time, and your help means everything. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching leaves just one like and one comment, we can easily make it happen. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And now, let's get started. The sky stretched endlessly above as I navigated the narrow trail toward my new home. 3 weeks ago, I'd been shuffling paperwork in Anchorage. Now, I stood at the edge of one of the most remote outposts in Denali National Park, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by the isolation. My name is Koyuk, meaning man of the wilderness in Inupiaq. Though I wasn't born with it, I chose it when I took this position, shedding my former identity like old skin. The ranger cabin stood nestled among towering pines, their branches creating a natural canopy. Lake Anaktok stretched before it, still as glass, reflecting the mountains like nature's perfect mirror. This would be my domain for the next 2 years, 20 miles from the nearest outpost, 50 from anything resembling civilization. I set my pack down on the weathered porch, key in hand, and paused to absorb the silence. Not the urban quiet I'd grown accustomed to. This was different, profound, almost deafening in its completeness. The occasional chirp of a distant bird or rustle of leaves only emphasized the vast emptiness surrounding me. "Home sweet home," I muttered, pushing open the door to reveal a surprisingly well-maintained interior. One main room with a small kitchen area, wood stove, desk, and communication equipment. A doorway led to a modest bedroom with a simple cot, basic, functional, isolated, perfect. My predecessor had left detailed notes about the area's wildlife patterns, weather expectations, and common concerns from the handful of hikers who ventured this far into the wilderness. Nothing unusual, just standard ranger protocols. The final page, however, caught my attention. Hastily scrawled at the bottom, "Watch the tree line at dusk, listen to the locals, some legends have roots." I dismissed it as the musings of someone who'd spent too much time alone. 2 years in isolation would make anyone cryptic. Still, something about those words lingered as I unpacked my supplies. The radio crackled to life, startling me. "Anaktok Basin, this is Ranger Control. Do you copy? Over." I fumbled with the receiver. "This is Anaktok Basin. Ranger Koyuk speaking. I copy. Over." "Welcome to the wilderness, Koyuk. Just checking that you arrived safely. Weather reports show a storm system moving in. Make sure you're battened down before nightfall. Over." "Understood. Cabin's in good shape. I'll secure everything before dark. Over." "Good man. Check in every 48 hours. Control out." The transmission ended, leaving me once again with the profound silence. I finished unpacking, organized my gear, and studied the area maps. The afternoon drifted by as I familiarized myself with the cabin systems, the generator, water purification, emergency protocols. As dusk approached, I remembered the note. Against my better judgment, I found myself standing at the large window, watching the tree line as shadows lengthened across the forest floor. Nothing moved except the occasional bird. I shook my head, feeling foolish. The first drops of rain began tapping against the roof as I heated a simple meal. The storm arrived with surprising ferocity, wind howling through the pines, rain hammering against the cabin walls. I stoked the wood stove and settled in with the logbooks from previous rangers, curious to see if there were any other cryptic notes. Most entries were mundane, wildlife sightings, maintenance issues, weather patterns, but occasionally paragraphs were redacted, blacked out with marker. Official Park Service redactions, judging by the stamp at the bottom of each page. But information warranted censorship in a ranger's daily log. The wind suddenly intensified, screaming around the cabin's corners. I moved to check the window when a deafening crack split the air. A massive pine had fallen across the clearing, missing the cabin by mere feet. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see its massive trunk and sprawling root system, torn from the earth. Lightning hadn't struck it. The tree looked healthy, strong, yet something had uprooted it completely. As I stared, movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness between the trees. Large, bipedal, hunched. For a moment, our eyes seemed to meet across the distance. Then the rain intensified, and whatever I'd seen vanished into the tree line. I convinced myself it was a bear, standing momentarily on its hind legs. Bears were common here, after all. But bears don't stare with purpose. Bears don't deliberately retreat into shadows. And bears don't uproot century-old pines. I secured the cabin's locks, checked the satellite phone, and kept my service weapon close. The storm raged through the night as I pored over maps and documents, learning everything I could about the region's history and reported wildlife. The official materials mentioned nothing unusual. But tucked into the back of the desk drawer, I found a worn journal filled with handwritten accounts from various rangers, stories of strange tracks, unexplained noises, missing hikers, and through it all, references to the Watcher in the woods. I'd taken this job to escape, to heal from wounds both physical and mental. After the accident that claimed my climbing partner's life, I'd needed distance from everything and everyone. The Alaska Wilderness Ranger Service had seemed perfect. No one asked questions about my past. No one expected me to talk about what happened on that mountain face. Dawn broke with unusual clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. I surveyed the damage from the porch, numerous fallen branches, debris scattered across the clearing, but nothing catastrophic. The massive fallen pine looked even more impressive in daylight, its root system taller than me. I approached it cautiously, examining the base. Something wasn't right. The roots hadn't simply torn free from the soil. They'd been pulled, wrenched from the ground with tremendous force. Marking the tree's position on my map, I began a perimeter check, documenting the storm damage for my report. That's when I found the first track. Pressed into the mud near the lake's edge was a footprint unlike anything I'd ever seen. Humanoid in shape but massive, easily 18 inches long. The impression was deep, suggesting incredible weight. I photographed it with my equipment and made a plaster cast, trying to maintain scientific detachment despite the chill running through my body. This was no bear. No known animal made prints like these. As I worked, a noise reached me from across the lake, a low, rhythmic moaning that seemed to emanate from the very earth. It wasn't wind. It wasn't any animal call I recognized. It was deliberate communication. I scanned the opposite shore, binoculars revealing nothing but pristine wilderness. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, studied, by something concealed among the trees. The radio crackled inside the cabin. I rushed back, hoping for human contact. Anektok Basin, this is local guide Asquito. Do you copy, new ranger? Over. I grabbed the receiver. This is Ranger Koyak. I copy. Over. Welcome to the Forgotten Corner, Ranger. I'm bringing a hunting party through your region 2 days from now. Standard notification. Anything we should know about? Over. I hesitated, looking at the plaster cast drying on the table. Had some storm damage. Large tree down near the cabin. Otherwise all clear. Over. Good to hear. We'll make camp at the north end of the lake. Stop by if you want some company. Most rangers get hungry for conversation after a few weeks up there. Over. Appreciate it. Safe travels. Over and out. I stared at the cast, debating whether to report the footprint to headquarters. They'd want evidence beyond a single track. They'd want explanations. And worst of all, they might decide the area needed scientific investigation, bringing teams of researchers to disturb the delicate balance of this place. Something within me wanted to protect this mystery, even as another part feared what I might be harboring. What had drawn me to this remote outpost? Was it really just the need for solitude, or something deeper? Something calling me to this specific wilderness? As darkness fell again, I found myself once more at the window, watching the tree line as instructed. The clouds had cleared, revealing a moonlit forest that seemed to pulsate with secret life. In the distance, something moved, a tall, dark silhouette gliding between trees with unnatural grace. I doused the cabin lights and continued watching. The figure emerged briefly into a clearing silhouetted against the moonlit lake. Tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. My breath caught as it turned directly toward the cabin. Even from this distance, I felt seen, known, judged. Then it was gone, melting into the forest as if it had never existed. That night, I dreamed of mountains and caves, of ancient beings and forgotten packs. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat despite the cabin's chill. On the window, clearly visible in the morning light, was a handprint, far larger than any human's, pressed against the glass from outside. I hadn't imagined what I'd seen, and whatever it was, it had come to inspect me while I slept. The handprint vanished when I approached the window, evaporating like morning dew, under sunlight. I questioned my sanity briefly before donning my gear for a patrol. The massive footprint by the lake had hardened overnight, preserved perfectly in the mud. I photographed it again, adding a ruler for scale this time. My radio check with headquarters was brief and professional. I mentioned the fallen tree but said nothing about tracks or handprints. Some instinct told me to keep these findings private, at least until I understood more. Armed with my service rifle and recording equipment, I set out along the eastern shore of Lake Anektok. The morning was crisp, sunlight dancing across the water's surface. Under different circumstances, I might have found it peaceful. But the weight of what I'd seen, what I continued to feel watching me, transformed the beauty into something ominous. 2 hours into my hike, I discovered a deer carcass. The animal had been torn apart with tremendous force, not consumed like a predator's kill. Its remains were scattered across a small clearing, with no sign of being fed upon. More disturbing were the marks on the trees surrounding the site, deep gouges in the bark at a height of nearly 9 feet. Not bear claws. These were deliberate patterns, almost like warnings. I documented everything, growing increasingly uneasy. This wasn't normal animal behavior. The systematic destruction suggested intelligence, purpose, rage. A twig snapped in the distance. I froze, listening intently as birds fell silent. The forest held its breath. Something was moving through the underbrush, circling my position. I raised my rifle, turning slowly to track the sound. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "National Park Service. Identify yourself." The movement stopped. For several excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Then a rhythmic knocking began, wood against wood, from multiple directions, 3 sharp impacts, followed by 2 slow ones. Repeated, coordinated. They were surrounding me. I backed toward the lake, keeping my weapon ready. The knocking followed, maintaining distance but clearly tracking my retreat. When I reached the shoreline, it stopped abruptly, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves against the rocky beach. Across the water, something massive moved through the tree line, just a glimpse of dark fur and powerful movement before it vanished. I raised my binoculars but saw nothing except disturbed branches, slowly settling. The journey back to the cabin was tense, every sense heightened to painful awareness. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The forest I'd admired yesterday now seemed filled with watching eyes and hidden threats. When the cabin finally came into view, relief washed over me until I noticed the door standing open. I'd locked it, I was certain. Approaching cautiously, rifle ready, I called out again. No response. The interior appeared undisturbed except for one detail. The plaster cast of the footprint had been turned over, as if examined. Nothing else was touched. As I secured the door, the radio crackled. "Anaktok Basin, this is local Elder Nushka. Request conversation, Ranger. Over." I hesitated before responding. "This is Ranger Koyuk. Go ahead. Over." "Not over radio. In person. Will arrive tomorrow morning. Important you understand the territory you guard. Over." "Understood. I'll be here." Over and out. The transmission ended before I could ask questions. I checked the logs, finding no mention of any elder named Nushka having official business in the park. Unofficial consultations with local indigenous leaders weren't uncommon, but they were typically arranged through headquarters. That night, the forest came alive with sounds. Not the normal nocturnal chorus of insects and hunting predators, but something orchestrated. Wood knocking continued at irregular intervals, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Occasionally, a low vocalization would rise above the other sounds, a moan that transformed into something almost like speech before fading away. I recorded everything, checking and rechecking the cabin's locks. Around midnight, the activity intensified. Heavy footsteps circled the perimeter, stopping occasionally at windows. I kept lights off, moving silently through the cabin with my night vision equipment. Through the green-tinted view, I caught glimpses of massive shapes moving through the darkness. Not one creature, but several. They maintained distance from each other, creating a loose perimeter around the cabin. Sentries. At precisely 3:17 a.m., everything stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the activity had been. I positioned myself at the main window, scanning methodically for movement. What I saw next defies rational explanation. A figure emerged from the tree line, much taller than a man, covered in dark fur, walking upright with unsettling grace. It moved deliberately to the center of the clearing, moonlight revealing a broad, sloped forehead and deep-set eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal animal's. For several minutes it simply stood there, staring at the cabin. Then it raised massive arms and made a series of gestures, deliberate movements that could only be described as sign language, different from human signing, but undeniably communication. When it finished, it waited, as if expecting a response. When none came, it repeated the sequence more slowly, then a third time. After the third repetition, it turned and disappeared into the forest with astonishing speed for its size. I remained frozen at the window, struggling to process what I'd witnessed. This wasn't just a creature, it was an intelligent being attempting communication. My hands trembled as I noted the encounter in my personal journal, knowing this would never appear in an official report. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. As light filtered through the trees, I ventured outside, rifle ready. The clearing revealed multiple sets of enormous tracks crossing from various directions, all converging on the spot where the creature had stood. I photographed everything, made more casts, and collected hair samples from bark where they had brushed against trees. Around mid-morning, a small boat approached from the north end of the lake. An elderly native woman sat at the stern, navigating with confident precision. She beached the craft and approached without hesitation. Ranger Koyuk, I am Nushka. Her weathered face revealed decades of hard living in this unforgiving wilderness, but her eyes remained sharp, evaluating me with unsettling intensity. You've seen them, she stated flatly. Not a question. I nodded, unable to deny it. They've been watching you since you arrived, testing you. Last night, they attempted contact. She gestured toward the clearing. Did you respond? I didn't know how. She nodded, unsurprised. Few do. That is why I am here, to teach you their language before it's too late. Too late for what? Her expression darkened. Too late for the lost ones. There are 3 hikers missing in the northern valley. The people of the forest know where they are. They will show you, but only if you demonstrate understanding. I invited her inside, where she examined my casts and photographs without surprise. She traced the patterns I'd documented on the trees. Warning marks, she confirmed. Territory boundaries. The deer was a message. They protect what's theirs. What exactly are they? I finally asked. She fixed me with a penetrating stare. The original guardians of this land. They were here long before humans. They remain where the wilderness is deepest, watching, judging. Your government calls this area a national park. To them it is simply home. Bigfoot? Sasquatch? I offered, feeling foolish even saying the words. Those are human names for something humans don't understand. They call themselves the Kushtaka in our language, the forest people, ancient, intelligent, territorial, and now, concerned about the missing hikers in their territory. She spent the afternoon teaching me rudimentary signs, acknowledgement, respect, inquiry. Basic communication with beings I'd been taught couldn't possibly exist. As the sun began its descent, she prepared to leave. Tonight, they will return. Show them you understand. Ask about the hikers. She handed me a small leather pouch. An offering. Place it where the tall one stood, then wait inside. After she departed, I examined the pouch. Tobacco, berries, and something that smelled like cedar. I followed her instructions, placing it at the center of the clearing as darkness fell. Back inside, I waited, recording equipment ready. The night passed in tense silence until midnight, when the wood knocking began again. 3 hours later, they appeared. Not just one, but 3 massive figures emerging from different points along the tree line. The largest approached the offering, examined it, then looked directly at the cabin. It began signing. With trembling hands, I responded with the simple acknowledgement gesture Nushka had taught me. The creature went still, then signed again, more complex this time, but ending with a motion I recognized. Inquiry. I stepped onto the porch, heart pounding, and repeated the inquiry sign, adding the motion for people and lost as best I could remember. The response was immediate. All 3 creatures became animated, exchanging signs among themselves before the largest turned back to me and made a follow motion, then pointed north. They wanted me to come with them. Now. I grabbed my emergency pack, weapon, and communication equipment. Against every protocol and procedure, I stepped into the night, following 3 creatures that science insisted didn't exist, into the darkest part of the wilderness. The search for the missing hikers had begun. They moved with astonishing speed and silence through terrain that had me stumbling and gasping for breath. My headlamp illuminated just enough path to follow, but they seemed to navigate by some other sense, flowing through the forest like water. The smallest of the 3, still over 7 feet tall, occasionally glanced back, slowing when I fell too far behind. We traveled for hours, climbing steadily into the mountains north of the lake. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing me to use climbing equipment at several points. They simply scaled the rocks with powerful arms and feet that seemed designed for this environment. Dawn broke as we reached a high ridge overlooking a vast, mist-filled valley. The largest creature, whom I'd begun thinking of as the leader, gestured for me to stop, then pointed down into the swirling fog. The message was clear. Our destination lay below. I checked my GPS unit. We'd traveled nearly 15 miles from the cabin, into territory rarely visited even by the most experienced park rangers. No wonder the missing hikers hadn't been found. Search teams would have focused on established trails, not this primeval wilderness. The descent into the valley took another hour. As we penetrated the mist, temperature dropped noticeably. The forest changed character, older somehow, with massive trees I couldn't identify, and thick undergrowth that seemed to part before my guides but tangle around my legs. The leader stopped abruptly, raising a hand. A low vocalization rumbled from its chest, not directed at me, but at something ahead. An answering call echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. We weren't alone. From the undergrowth emerged another of the creatures, smaller, limping visibly, with a long scar across its face. It regarded me with obvious hostility, barking a series of sounds at the leader. They exchanged signs too rapid for me to follow, gestures becoming increasingly aggressive. I stood perfectly still, aware that I was witnessing some kind of confrontation about my presence. The injured creature clearly objected to bringing a human into their territory. Finally, the leader made a definitive gesture that silenced the argument. The scarred creature retreated, disappearing into the mist with a final threatening glance in my direction. The leader turned to me, pointing ahead before making the sign for danger. We continued more cautiously, the forest growing darker despite the morning hour. The mist thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards. Strange formations began appearing through the fog, structures of bent living trees, forming crude but intentional shapes. Territorial markers, perhaps, or something with deeper significance. After another mile, we reached a cluster of massive boulders arranged in a rough circle. At the center lay a sight that stopped me cold. Camping equipment scattered across the ground, 3 backpacks partially emptied, an extinguished fire pit, the missing hiker's camp. I approached cautiously, examining the scene. No signs of struggle, no blood. Personal items remained in the packs, wallets, identification, even a cell phone. Whatever had happened, it hadn't been a surprise attack or robbery. "Hello?" I called, voice echoing strangely through the mist. "National Park Service. Anyone here?" My guides tensed at the sound, exchanging glances. The leader made an urgent silencing gesture, then pointed deeper into the boulder field. We needed to go further. As we navigated between massive stones, the mist began to take on a yellowish tinge. A sulfurous smell permeated the air, growing stronger with each step. The creature's behavior changed, more hesitant, more alert. Even they feared what lay ahead. The boulders gave way to a sheer rock face. At its base, a dark opening gaped like a wound in the earth, a cave entrance partially concealed by fallen debris. The leader pointed emphatically at the cave, then made the signs for people and inside. The hikers were in there. I activated my radio, hoping for a connection despite the remote location. To my surprise, it crackled to life. "Ranger Control, this is Koyuk. Do you copy? Over." Static hissed, then a broken response. "Koyuk, position. Repeat. Located possible position of missing hikers, approximately 15 miles northwest of Anaktok Basin. Cave system and valley below Northern Ridge. Requesting backup and medical support. Over." More static then. "Signal weak. Coordinates, confirm." I provided GPS coordinates, unable to explain how I'd found this location or who my guides were. "Beginning investigation of cave system. 3 missing persons potentially inside. Will establish communication when possible. Over." The radio died completely after that transmission. I turned to my guides, who watched with evident curiosity at the device. "Help is coming," I told them, unsure if they understood my words. "I need to check inside." I prepared my equipment: headlamp, backup light, first aid kit, water. The leader reached out suddenly, massive hand gently but firmly gripping my arm. It made a series of signs I didn't recognize, except for the final one, danger. "I understand," I nodded, "but I have to go. It's my job." A creature released me, then made a decision. It gestured to the others, and one departed quickly, moving back the way we'd come. The leader and the remaining guide faced the cave entrance, clearly intent on accompanying me. I activated my headlamp and stepped into darkness. The entrance narrowed quickly, forcing us into single file. The creatures had to crouch significantly, their massive frames ill-suited to the confined space. The smaller one took the lead, while the leader followed behind me. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, the stone smooth beneath our feet. This was no natural formation but a constructed passage. The sulfur smell intensified as we descended. Yellow mineral deposits lined the walls, glittering in my light beam. The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into a large chamber, with a ceiling lost in darkness above. My light couldn't penetrate far enough to see the top. The chamber contained structures, crude stone formations that might have been altars or tables. Ancient symbols covered the walls, unlike any petroglyphs I'd documented in my training. This place was old, far older than human presence in the region. A moan echoed from deeper within the cave system. Human. I moved toward the sound, following a smaller passage that branched from the main chamber. My guides became increasingly agitated, making gestures I couldn't interpret, but their anxiety was palpable. They feared whatever lay ahead. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller but illuminated by a strange pulsating bioluminescence that clung to the walls. The light revealed 3 figures huddled against the far wall, the missing hikers. They were alive but clearly traumatized. 2 men and a woman, their clothing torn, faces pale and drawn. When my light hit them, they cowered away, shielding their eyes. National Park Service, I called, moving slowly toward them. I'm Ranger Koyuk. I'm here to help you. Keep them away, one man sobbed, pointing behind me. Don't let them take us again. I turned to see my guides hanging back at the chamber entrance, unwilling to enter this space. The leader made urgent gestures. We needed to leave, now. What happened to you? I asked the hikers, approaching cautiously. Can you walk? We got lost, the woman whispered, voice hoarse. 3 days ago. Found the cave during the storm. Then, they came, brought us deeper, kept us here. We're not the first, the second man added, revealing a wall covered with tally marks. Others were here before, so many marks. A low rumble suddenly shook the chamber. Dust and small stones fell from above. My guides became frantic, vocalizing loudly, gesturing for immediate evacuation. We need to go, I told the hikers, helping them to their feet. Follow me, right now. Not the tunnel, the first man cried. That's where it comes from. What comes from where? I demanded. Before anyone could answer, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. Not the vocalizations of my guides, something altogether different. Deeper, ancient, hungry. The bioluminescence pulsed rapidly, as if responding to the sound. From a dark opening at the chamber's far side, something moved. Something massive, pale, eyeless. It sensed our presence without seeing, turning a grotesque, elongated head in our direction. My guides retreated immediately, pulling me back toward the tunnel. The hikers needed no encouragement, scrambling after us in terror. The thing in the darkness roared again, now surging forward with frightening speed for its size. We fled through the narrow passage, the creature's roars pursuing us. The hikers struggled to keep pace, weakened by days of captivity. I supported the woman, while the leader unexpectedly scooped up one of the men who had collapsed. Despite their evident fear, my guides were helping with the rescue. We burst into the main chamber just as another tremor shook the cave. Larger stones began falling now, the entire system becoming unstable. Run, I shouted, pushing everyone toward the exit tunnel. The whole place is coming down. We charged through the ascending passage, the sounds of collapse growing behind us. The creature's roars became desperate, then faded as rock falls separated it from us. Daylight appeared ahead, a small circle of salvation growing larger with each step. We erupted from the cave entrance as a massive cloud of dust billowed out behind us. The ground shook violently, and a large section of the rock face collapsed inward, sealing the entrance completely. Outside, more of the creatures waited, at least a dozen, including the one that had left us earlier. They maintained distance from us, watching silently as we caught our breath. The hikers stared in disbelief at the gathering of beings science insisted didn't exist. They saved us, the woman whispered. Why? They were the ones who took us. The leader approached slowly, making deliberate signs. Not to me this time, but to the hikers. It pointed to the now collapsed cave, then to the sky, then made a gesture Nushka had taught me, warning. They didn't capture you, I realized aloud. They were protecting you, from whatever was in there. The hikers' expressions shifted from fear to confusion. But they brought us into the cave. No, I corrected, understanding dawning. They found you already in the cave's outer chambers. They were keeping you away from the deeper parts, from that thing. As if confirming my interpretation, the leader nodded slowly, a distinctly human gesture it must have learned from observation. It pointed to the hikers, then to me, then in the direction of the lake and cabin. They want me to take you back, I translated, to safety. The radio suddenly crackled, signal restored now that we were outside. Koyuk, this is Rescue Team Alpha. Do you copy? Over. This is Koyuk, I responded quickly. I've located all 3 hikers, alive but requiring medical attention. Cave system has collapsed. We're returning to extraction point. Over. Understood. Helicopter dispatched to your coordinates. ETA 3 hours. Over. I turned to thank my guides, but they were already retreating into the forest, melting away with that same uncanny silence. Only the leader remained, watching from the tree line. Thank you, I called to it, adding the gesture for gratitude Nushka had taught me. It raised one massive hand in acknowledgement, then disappeared among the ancient trees. The hikers stared at me in shock. What were those things? One finally asked. The original guardians of this wilderness, I answered, echoing Nushka's words, and I think they just recruited me to help them. The official report contains significant redactions. The rescue helicopter extracted us from a clearing 2 miles from the cave site, far enough that the flight crew saw nothing unusual. The hikers received medical attention, their condition diagnosed as dehydration and shock. Their story about being held in caves by massive humanoid creatures was attributed to hallucinations from their ordeal. I provided coordinates, confirmed the cave collapse, and offered no explanation for how I'd located them 15 miles from their last known position. When pressed, I claimed to have found tracks and followed ranger training protocols. My superiors accepted this with visible relief. They wanted a success story, not an inexplicable one. 2 days later, I returned to my cabin at Lake Anaktok. The forest felt different now, not a wilderness to be conquered or even protected, but a realm with its own ancient guardians and rules. I was merely a visitor granted conditional access. Elder Nushka arrived as I was unpacking supplies from the ranger boat. You have seen, she stated simply. Now you understand. Not everything, I admitted. What was that thing in the cave? The pale creature? Her expression darkened. The enemy. The reason they need human allies. She settled on the porch step, gesturing for me to join her. There are old stories among my people, very old, about a time when the forest people and humans lived separately but acknowledged each other. Then something came, something not of this world. It drove the forest people deeper into wilderness. They've been fighting it ever since. Fighting what? That thing didn't look natural. It is not. It comes from beneath and beyond. Many names and many stories. Wendigo, Go-Get, the hunger that walks. It infects minds first, then bodies. She tapped her temple, makes you see things, want things. Then it takes you. The hikers were being prepared. The forest people saved them by keeping them away from its influence. They've done this many times before. Why don't they just kill it? She laughed without humor. You cannot kill what was never truly alive. You can only contain it. For generations they've been guardians, keeping it sealed away. But now, humans penetrate deeper into their territory. Unwitting sacrifices walking straight to the enemy. And they recruited me to help? Why me? They choose carefully, watch for signs. Your predecessor was also chosen, and the one before her. This cabin has been a meeting point for generations. She gestured at the structure, built on their terms, in their territory, with their permission. I processed this revelation, that the National Park Service had, perhaps unwittingly, maintained a relationship with these beings for decades. The cave collapsed, I noted. Is the creature trapped? For now. But there are other entrances to its domain. The collapse bought time, nothing more. She fixed me with an intense gaze. They will come tonight, to teach you more signs, to show you the other entrances. Will you help them, Ranger Koyuk? I thought about the terror in that cave, about the hikers who would have been consumed by something ancient and malevolent if not for intervention, about a duty that extended beyond my human employers to the land itself. Yes, I answered. I'll help them. Nushka nodded approvingly. Good. There aren't many who would. Fear makes humans violent toward what they don't understand. As promised, they came that night. 5 of them, including the leader I'd followed before. They approached openly, no longer hiding their presence from me. The leader came directly to the porch where I waited, towering over me with an intimidating presence that somehow no longer felt threatening. I made the signs for greeting and respect. It responded in kind, then added signs I didn't recognize. Nushka, sitting quietly nearby, translated. They thank you for helping save the lost ones. They say you have proven worthy of truth. For hours they taught me their rudimentary sign language. Through Nushka's translations I learned about their society, their history, their ongoing war against the creature they called simply the hunger. The hunger had arrived generations ago, burrowing beneath the mountains, creating a complex cave system from which it could emerge to feed. It consumed body and soul, using human minds as vessels to spread its influence. The forest people, whom Nushka called the Kushtaka, had contained it for centuries, but modern human intrusion complicated their efforts. Why don't they just relocate? I asked. Nushka's expression grew solemn after the leader responded. They are bound to this place. The hunger cannot be allowed to escape the valley. If it does, it will spread like a plague through human settlements, growing stronger with each mind it corrupts. Why not tell the Park Service? We could close the area, fence it off. More signs from the leader, increasingly agitated. They tried, Nushka translated, 3 times in the past century. Each time humans came with weapons, with machines. They did not listen, did not understand. Many died, both humans and forest people. The implications were staggering. A shadow war had been raging in this wilderness, invisible to human society, with these creatures as the only barrier between humanity and something truly monstrous. Before departing, the leader gave me a final message. Nushka's voice grew grave as she translated. The hunger grows stronger. The cave collapse angered it. It will try another path soon. They need you to prevent humans from entering the North Valley until the season of snow. Can you do this? I nodded, understanding the gravity of my new responsibility. I'll find a way. They melted into the night, leaving me with knowledge few humans possessed, and a burden I'd never anticipated when accepting this post. The next morning, I contacted headquarters with an urgent recommendation: close the North Valley trails due to unstable geological conditions. I fabricated a convincing report about fissures and potential landslides, knowing that a summer closure would face resistance. When my supervisor questioned the recommendation, I played my final card. The safety of the recently rescued hikers had been compromised by exactly these conditions. The cave collapse that nearly killed them might have been just the beginning. The closure was approved. Signs would be posted, maps updated. The North Valley would be off limits until winter, when snowfall would naturally prevent access. For 2 weeks I patrolled the boundaries, turning away the few determined hikers who tried to circumvent the closure. The forest people appeared occasionally, watching from distance, ensuring I maintained my end of our unspoken agreement. Then came the night that changed everything. A series of earthquakes, minor tremors barely registering on seismic equipment, shook the region. To casual observers, it was nothing alarming. To me, it signaled something trying to break free. The forest people appeared at dusk, more agitated than I'd ever seen them. Their signs were urgent, demanding I follow immediately. I grabbed my emergency gear and joined them without question. We traveled through the night, covering difficult terrain with remarkable speed. By dawn, we'd reached a different section of the North Valley, a rocky area dominated by a sheer cliff face. At its base, a narrow fissure leaked yellowish mist into the morning air. The leader pointed at the fissure, then made the sign for hunger, followed by escape. The creature was breaking through a new exit. I activated my emergency radio, calling for immediate support. Geological emergency in North Valley Section C7. Toxic gas venting from new fissure. Request immediate specialized containment team. Potential hazard to regional water table. It wasn't entirely a lie. The yellowish mist certainly appeared toxic. But I knew no containment team could handle what was really trying to emerge. As we waited for the response team, the forest people worked frantically, dragging massive stones and fallen trees to the fissure, attempting to seal it. The ground trembled continuously underfoot, the fissure widening despite their efforts. A roar erupted from deep within the earth, the same horrific sound I'd heard in the cave. The forest people responded with their own vocalizations, a chorus of defiance against the ancient enemy. 4 hours later, helicopters appeared overhead. The forest people retreated instantly, vanishing into the tree line. I remained, directing the hazmat team to the fissure, maintaining my story about toxic geological emissions. They deployed containment measures, concrete, expanding foam, sensor equipment. I watched with silent hope, knowing these human efforts might temporarily reinforce what the forest people had begun. As the team worked, I noticed movement at the tree line. Not the forest people this time, but a human figure, Elder Nushka, observing from distance. When our eyes met, she nodded once, then retreated into the forest. By nightfall, the fissure was sealed with 20 tons of quick-setting concrete and a monitoring station established nearby. The team departed, leaving me to maintain observation overnight. In the darkness, the forest people returned, examining the human handiwork with evident curiosity. The leader approached, gesturing toward the now sealed fissure, then to me, then made the sign for gratitude. I nodded acknowledgement, then asked the question that had been haunting me. Will it hold? The leader's response needed no translation, a gesture of uncertainty, followed by the sign for watching and waiting. We had won a battle, not the war. As dawn approached, I realized my role had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just a park ranger but a sentinel standing between humanity and something ancient and malevolent, a bridge between two species united against a common enemy. The forest people departed with the morning light, but I knew they remained nearby, watching, waiting, as they had for generations. I returned to my cabin to file reports filled with geological terminology and environmental concerns, protecting a truth the world wasn't ready to accept. That night, a final visitor arrived, Elder Nushka, bearing a small wooden box. "For you," she said, placing it on the table. "From them." Inside lay a necklace of intricately carved stone beads, each bearing symbols matching those I'd seen in the cave. "A mark of their trust," she explained. "Wear it when you enter their territory, and they will know you as ally." "How long have you been their messenger?" I asked. "Since I was a girl. My grandmother before me, and hers before that." She smiled faintly. "The burden passes through generations. Now it includes you." As she left, she paused at the door. "Your name, Koyuk, man of the wilderness. Did you choose it by chance?" "It just felt right when I came here." She nodded, unsurprised. "Names have power. They saw that power in you before you even arrived. Nothing here happens by chance, Ranger Koyuk. Remember that." I stood at the window long after she departed, watching the tree line as dusk settled over the wilderness. Movement caught my eye, massive shadows flowing between ancient trunks with graceful precision. The Guardians continued their vigil, as they had for centuries, and now, so would I. 6 months passed. Winter transformed the landscape into a frozen stillness that made patrols difficult but sealed the North Valley beneath impenetrable snow. The concrete barrier held, its monitoring equipment showing no further seismic activity. The forest people appeared less frequently, their massive forms occasionally visible through snow-laden branches. They maintained distance but acknowledged my presence with subtle gestures when our paths crossed. My reports to headquarters remained factual but vague, documenting weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and maintenance issues. My request to extend my assignment for another year was approved without question. Experienced rangers willing to endure the isolation were rare. Elder Naishka visited monthly, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Through her, I learned more about the history of this arrangement, how generations of her people had served as intermediaries between the forest guardians and the human authorities who unknowingly shared their mission. The first European to encounter them was a Russian fur trapper in 1887, she explained during one visit. He fled in terror, but returned with others. Many died before understanding was reached. "How did your people first come to work with them?" I asked. "Long before recorded history, our oldest stories tell of the great hunger that came from the sky, and how the Tall Ones helped contain it." She gestured toward the mountains. The valley was not always a valley. Once it was flat land. The Tall Ones and our ancient shamans sacrificed much to create the containment. I absorbed this, imagining a cataclysm powerful enough to reshape the landscape, part natural disaster, part deliberate action. When spring arrived, melting snow revealed new fissures surrounding the concrete barrier. The monitoring equipment remained silent, but yellowed vegetation circled the site like a disease spreading outward. I documented everything, sending samples to headquarters for analysis. The results came back inconclusive, abnormal but attributable to unique mineral composition in the soil. The forest people grew more active as the weather warmed. They patrolled in groups, reinforcing the barrier with their own methods. Structures of interwoven living saplings grown at impossible speeds through some process I couldn't comprehend. In late May, the first hikers of the season arrived in the southern part of my territory. I welcomed them with standard safety briefings, carefully steering them away from the North Valley without arousing suspicion. One night, as I reviewed patrol maps, the radio crackled unexpectedly. "Anaktok Basin. This is Dr. Leah Mikva, Geological Survey. Requesting permission to access North Valley Restricted Zone tomorrow. Authorization code Sierra 934. Over." I froze. No geological survey had been scheduled. "This is Ranger Koyuk. May I ask the purpose of your survey?" Over. Routine follow-up to last year's seismic anomalies. 3-person team, 1 day on site. Over. I considered my options carefully. Denying access would raise questions. Allowing it might expose secrets better kept hidden. Understood. Please report to Anaktok Basin Cabin at 8:0800 hours for escort. Safety protocols in effect. Over. Copy that. See you at 0800. Over and out. I immediately hiked to the meeting place where the forest people occasionally left signs for me. A lightning-struck tree halfway to the North Valley. There, I left my own message. Rocks arranged in the pattern they'd taught me for danger and strangers. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would escort the team, control what they saw, and protect both their safety and the greater secret. If necessary, I would reveal limited information to Dr. Mikva, enough to establish the importance of containment without exposing the full truth. The geological team arrived precisely at 0800. Dr. Mikva, a thin woman with intelligent eyes, accompanied by two younger assistants laden with equipment. Their credentials appeared legitimate, but something felt wrong. Their interest seemed too focused, too specific. "We've identified unusual magnetic anomalies around the concrete installation," Dr. Mikva explained as we hiked. "Completely unexpected for this geological formation." "The whole area is unusual," I replied carefully. "That's why we maintain the closure." She studied me with sudden intensity. "Ranger Koyuk, how long have you been stationed here?" "Almost a year." "And you've noticed nothing unusual beyond the geological features?" I maintained a neutral expression. "Define unusual, Doctor." Before she could respond, movement caught my eye. A shadow where no shadow should be, watching from dense undergrowth. We were being followed. I redirected the conversation, pointing out legitimate geological features as we approached the containment site. The closer we came to the concrete barrier, the more I noticed small signs of the forest people's presence. Broken branches at improbable heights, footprints quickly covered but still visible to a trained eye. Dr. Mikva noticed too. Her gaze lingered on these anomalies, but she made no comment. The containment site appeared unchanged, concrete barrier intact, monitoring equipment quietly humming. The team set up additional sensors, taking soil and air samples, working with methodical precision. As they worked, I noticed one assistant repeatedly wandering toward the tree line, camera in hand, seemingly documenting the vegetation but angling his lens toward the deeper forest. "Please stay within the designated area," I called firmly. "The terrain can be unstable." He nodded but seemed disappointed. Not the reaction of a geologist, but of a hunter whose prey remained elusive. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead. The team worked faster, Dr. Mikva frequently checking her watch. "We need another hour," she told me. "The readings are significant." "The weather's turning," I countered. "We should head back." "Just 30 more minutes," she insisted. "This data could be crucial." I reluctantly agreed, watching the forest grow darker as clouds thickened. The wind carried an unusual scent, not the coming rain, but something sour and ancient. As the team packed their equipment, the assistant with the camera suddenly froze, staring into the forest. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Something big, moving between the trees." Dr. Mikva approached quickly. "Where exactly?" Her interest confirmed my suspicions. This was never about geology. "Probably a moose," I said firmly. "They're common in this area, and dangerous when startled. We need to leave, now." As if emphasizing my point, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The team reluctantly followed me back toward the trail, the assistant repeatedly glancing over his shoulder. We'd covered less than a mile when the storm hit, not with rain, but with a thick, unnatural fog that rolled down from the mountains with impossible speed. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere feet. "Stay close," I ordered, concern mounting. This was no natural weather pattern. A wood-knocking sound echoed through the fog. 3 sharp impacts, followed by 2 slow ones. The forest people's signal for danger. Not a warning to me this time, but about the researchers. "What's that noise?" the second assistant asked nervously. "Woodpecker," I lied. "Common in these parts." Dr. Mikva's expression told me she knew better. "That's no bird, Ranger." Before I could respond, the ground trembled beneath our feet. Not a major earthquake, but a deliberate vibration, like something massive moving underground. The concrete barrier. Something was testing it. "Run," I ordered, abandoning pretense. "Back to the trail, now." We fled through the fog, the rumbling growing louder behind us. Through the mist, massive shadows moved parallel to our course. The forest people, escorting us out, protecting us even as they maintained their distance. The assistant with the camera spotted them. "There," he shouted, raising his equipment. "I knew it." Before he could capture any images, a massive hand emerged from the fog, swatting the camera to the ground where it shattered. The assistant screamed, stumbling backward into Dr. Mikva. I made the emergency sign for friend and peace, stepping between my charges and the now visible forest guardian. It paused, recognizing me, then retreated just enough to remain partially concealed by fog. What is that thing? The assistant gasped. Your escort out, I replied grimly. Follow me and don't look back. The journey to the cabin was tense, fog following us the entire way, the forest people maintaining an invisible perimeter around our group. When we finally reached the relative safety of the clearing, Dr. Mikva pulled me aside. You know what they are, she stated flatly. That's why you're here. I studied her carefully. Why are you here, doctor? The truth. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket, producing not identification but a worn photograph, a group of researchers standing before a cave entrance. Among them was a younger version of herself, and beside her, my brother, she explained, voice tight with emotion. He disappeared in these mountains 20 years ago. The official report said he fell, but his body was never recovered. She pointed to the photo. But this was emailed to me 3 weeks ago from an anonymous source. Look at the date stamp. The photo had been taken 1 week before our conversation. He's alive, Ranger, somehow, and I need to find him. The pieces fell into place. Dr. Mikva wasn't hunting the forest people out of scientific curiosity, but searching for a lost brother who had somehow survived for decades in this wilderness. Doctor, I began carefully, if your brother is here, he may not be human anymore, she finished. I've spent 20 years researching the legends, the transformations, people taken into the forest who become something else. She knew more than I'd expected, perhaps enough to understand the greater threat. The containment site, I said slowly. It's not just a geological anomaly. I know. Whatever's down there, it's what my brother was researching when he disappeared. She met my gaze directly. He was looking for something ancient, something that doesn't belong in our world. The fog had begun to dissipate, revealing a silent circle of forest people surrounding the cabin clearing. They made no move to approach, but their message was clear. They were listening, evaluating. Dr. Mikva saw them too, but showed no fear. They protect it, contain it, yes? I nodded slowly. They've been doing it for generations, and they recruit help when they need it. Like you. Like me, I confirmed. And possibly like your brother. Hope flickered across her face. Then he's with them? I don't know. But if he's been here all this time, they would know. I gestured toward the watching guardians. They remember everything. The leader stepped forward, massive form fully revealed in the clearing light. It studied Dr. Mikva with evident recognition, then made a series of signs, complex, detailed communication intended for her specifically. To my astonishment, she responded with her own signs, not the rudimentary gestures I'd learned, but fluid, practiced movements. You speak their language, I realized. My brother taught me the basics from his early research. I've been practicing since I found the photo. Her hands moved again, forming questions I couldn't follow. The leader responded, then pointed north, not toward the containment site, but toward a different part of the mountains entirely. Dr. Mikva's eyes filled with tears. He's alive, changed, but alive. She turned to me. Will you help me find him? I looked at the forest people, receiving a subtle nod from the leader. On one condition. Your research, your equipment, everything you've gathered about this area. It can't leave here. The world isn't ready for this knowledge. She nodded without hesitation. Some secrets need keeping, Ranger, especially from those who would exploit them. Her assistants, huddled nervously by the cabin, didn't share her comfort. Dr. Mikva, we need to report this, one called. The university will hear exactly what I decide they should hear. She cut him off sharply. Inconclusive geological readings requiring further study. Nothing more. I respected her decision but remained wary. And your assistants? We'll comply, she stated with authority that brooked no argument. Or we'll find their academic careers surprisingly short. The forest people retreated as night approached, melting back into the wilderness that was their domain. Only the leader remained, watching from the tree line. That night, as Dr. Mikva prepared for a journey to find her transformed brother, Elder Nushka arrived unexpectedly. She showed no surprise at finding the research team, merely nodding to Dr. Mikva as if they were old acquaintances. The hunger grows stronger, she announced without preamble. The concrete fails. We must renew the old ways. What old ways? I asked. The binding, the covenant between peoples. She gestured to include Dr. Mikva. The bloodlines reunite for purpose. Understanding dawned slowly. Your brother wasn't taken, I told Dr. Mikva. He joined them willingly, to help maintain the containment. A watcher, Nushka confirmed. As you have become. as she must now decide to be. Dr. Mikva looked between us, then toward the dark forest where the leader still observed. Will I see him? Speak with him? Yes, Nushka replied, but not as the brother you remember. The transition changes more than form. I've spent 20 years searching for answers, Dr. Mikva said firmly. I'm not leaving without them. The night passed in preparation, not just for Dr. Mikva's journey, but for what Nushka called the renewal. The concrete barrier had always been temporary, a modern solution to an ancient problem. The true containment required something deeper, a covenant between the forest people and humans, willing to share their burden. As dawn approached, I stood on the cabin porch with Dr. Mikva. Her assistants would return to civilization with carefully curated data and sworn statements of confidentiality. She would continue into the wilderness with me and Nushka, seeking her brother and a truth few humans ever encountered. Are you certain? I asked her. Once you see everything, there's no going back. She nodded, watching the first light touch the distant mountains. Some questions demand answers, whatever the cost. And after? When you found your brother? She turned to me, expression resolute. Then I'll do what's necessary. What he did, what you've done. She touched the stone necklace I wore, the symbol of my covenant with the forest guardians. Some burdens are meant to be shared. The leader emerged from the tree line as the sun rose fully, approaching with the fluid grace that had once terrified me but now seemed merely part of the natural order. It made the sign for journey and beginning. Dr. Mikva responded with the sign for ready and truth. I made the sign for protection and alliance. Together we walked into the ancient forest, toward a reunion decades in the making and a renewal of bonds far older than human memory. Behind us, the cabin stood as it had for generations, a human outpost in territory that had never truly belonged to humanity alone. The wilderness had its own guardians, and now it had one more. Law enforcement in a small town like Marlington, Ohio isn't what most people imagine. There are no high-speed chases, no dramatic shootouts, no serial killers lurking in the shadows. At least, that's what I believed for the first 15 years of my career. The summer of 1998 changed everything I thought I knew about our quiet corner of the world. I'm Deputy Elias Perks, lifelong resident of Marlington County. At 42, I'd settled into the comfortable rhythm of small-town police work, breaking up the occasional bar fight, writing speeding tickets, and helping Mrs. Kensington find her wayward cat every other month. Marlington was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the same families had occupied the same farms for generations, where the most exciting event was the annual Harvest Festival. I grew up here, played football for Marlington High, married my high school sweetheart Diane, and never saw any reason to leave. The big cities with their crime rates and endless noise held no appeal. Here, I could see the stars at night and leave my front door unlocked. Friday, August 14th began like any other day. I woke at 5:30 a.m., kissed Diane goodbye as she mumbled sleepily into her pillow, and drove my pickup to the Buckshot Diner for breakfast. The morning air was already thick with humidity, promising another scorcher. Marlington had been suffering through a record heat wave for weeks, the temperature hovering in the high 90s day after day, the ground cracking with dryness. "Mornin', Eli," called Hank from behind the counter, already pouring my coffee, black, no sugar. Supposed to hit 100 again today. That's what they're saying. I slid onto my usual stool, nodding to the cluster of farmers huddled at the corner table, discussing crop yields and irrigation concerns. Any word on when this heat might break? Weatherman's talking about storms coming in Sunday night. Hank placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. Of course, he's been wrong before. The diner's ancient air conditioner struggled against the heat, the ceiling fans pushing the warm air around rather than cooling it. Outside, Main Street was quiet, only a few cars parked in front of the hardware store and post office. In summer, Marlington came alive early, before the worst of the heat descended. After breakfast, I headed to the station, a small brick building that housed the sheriff's department, 3 cells, and a dispatch center that doubled as a reception desk. Sheriff Holloway was already at his desk, a cigarette burning in the ashtray despite the no smoking signs he'd installed himself last year. "Perks," he nodded, not looking up from his paperwork. "Need you to swing by the high school later. Principal says some kids have been breaking in at night, drinking in the gym." "Will do, Sheriff." I settled at my desk, sorting through reports from the night before. A noise complaint, a fender bender in the grocery store parking lot, nothing unusual. By noon, the heat was suffocating. I'd driven around town twice, checked on the high school, and was considering an early lunch when the call came in. Betty, our dispatcher for the past 20 years, waved me over to her desk, her expression troubled. Eli, just got a call from Marge Downing. Her boy Jacob didn't come home last night. I frowned. Jacob? He's what, 15 now? 16 next month, Betty confirmed. Marge says he went out after dinner to set up some trail cameras in the forest behind their property. Hunting season prep. Never came back. He stay with friends sometimes? I asked, though something about Betty's tone had already set me on edge. That's the thing, Marge called around. Nobody's seen him, and his bed wasn't slept in. The Downings lived on the eastern edge of town, where civilization gave way to the sprawling state forest. Old-growth timber, dense underbrush, ravines and caves, thousands of acres of wilderness where a person could easily get lost, or worse. I'll head out there now, I said, grabbing my hat. Radio Sheriff Holloway. Let him know the situation. The drive to the Downing place took 20 minutes, the last 5 on a rutted dirt road that led to their isolated farmhouse. The Downings had been there for generations, scratching a living from the rocky soil and supplementing with hunting and occasional logging. The property backed directly onto state forest land, the tree line visible from their back porch. Marge Downing met me at the door, her weathered face etched with worry. At 55, she'd raised Jacob alone since her husband's death in a logging accident when the boy was just 5. She was tough as old leather, not one to panic over nothing. Elias, she gripped my arm with surprising strength. He's not back. I've been calling and calling. Walk me through it, Marge, I said, following her into the kitchen. When exactly did Jacob leave? After dinner, round 6:30. Said he wanted to get those trail cameras up before dark. He's hoping to track that 12-point buck he spotted last season. Her voice cracked. He took his backpack, the cameras, some water, no gun though, just his hunting knife. And he knows those woods pretty well. Like the back of his hand. Been hunting with his daddy since he could walk and then with his uncle after Tom passed. She gestured helplessly. I wasn't worried at first. Thought maybe he'd gone farther than planned. Decided to camp out, but his sleeping bag's still here. And his phone goes straight to voicemail. You said you called his friends. Everyone I could think of. Nobody's seen him. I nodded, making notes in my small pad. Did you go looking for him yourself? First thing this morning. Followed the trail he usually takes, called till my throat was raw. She leaned heavily against the kitchen counter. Found one of his water bottles about a mile in, just off the main trail. That's when I came back to call you. Something cold settled in my stomach. Jacob Downing wasn't a troublemaker. Good student, played baseball, helped his mother around the farm. Not the type to wander off without word. Show me where he went in, I said, following Marge out the back door. The forest loomed beyond Marge's vegetable garden, a solid wall of green. The trees stood unnaturally still in the thick air, no breeze to stir their leaves. As I stared into their shadows, I felt a strange reluctance to enter, like something was watching, waiting. I shook off the feeling. Professional paranoia, nothing more. I'm going in to look for him, I told Marge. You stay here in case he comes back. I'll radio for backup once I've had a look around. I'm coming with you, she insisted. Marge. It's my boy out there, Elias. There was no arguing with a mother's determination. Together we approached the tree line, the cool shadows a momentary relief from the merciless sun. As we stepped into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold, leaving the world we knew for something darker and more dangerous than either of us could imagine. The state forest had been part of my life since childhood. I'd hunted deer among these trees, fished the streams that wound through the valleys, even camped under the stars on countless summer nights. I thought I knew every trail, every clearing, every landmark within 10 miles of town. But as Marge Downing and I pushed deeper into the woods that August afternoon, everything felt unfamiliar. The familiar paths seemed to twist in unexpected directions. The quality of light filtering through the canopy was different, greener, murkier, as if we were underwater. Even the air felt wrong, heavy with moisture and the sickly sweet scent of decomposing vegetation. Jacob usually follows this trail, Marge said, pointing to a narrow path barely visible among the ferns and undergrowth. Takes him to a ridge where deer come through to reach the creek below. I nodded, scanning the ground for signs of recent passage. The trail showed clear boot prints heading in, the tread matching what you'd expect from a teenage boy's hiking boots. No sign of him coming back out. I found his water bottle just up ahead, Marge continued, moving faster now. The forest grew denser as we walked, the trees taller and older, their massive trunks covered in thick moss. Many of these giants had been here long before European settlers arrived, survivors of countless storms and wildfires. Their sprawling canopies blocked most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight below. Here, Marge stopped, pointing to a small clearing beside the trail. His bottle was right there, on that rock. I examined the area carefully. The water bottle was gone. Marge had taken it home, but there were clear signs someone had rested here. A few granola bar wrappers, a scuff in the dirt where someone had sat down. Did Jacob say exactly where he planned to put these trail cameras? I asked, kneeling to examine what looked like scuff marks leading off the main trail. He mentioned the ridge and maybe the old salt lick about a half-mile beyond. The cameras have memory cards, store images for weeks. He wanted to see what was coming through before hunting season. I nodded, standing up. Let's keep following the trail, see if we can spot any of the cameras. We continued in silence for another 15 minutes. The forests seemed to close in around us, the underbrush thicker, the trail narrower. Birds had gone quiet, and even the usual rustling of small creatures was absent. Just our footfalls and labored breathing broke the unnatural stillness. "Elias," Marge whispered suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Listen." I froze, straining to hear whatever had caught her attention. At first nothing. Then, a faint rhythmic sound in the distance, not quite footsteps, more like something heavy being dragged across the forest floor. Thump drag, thump drag. Could be a wounded animal, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. The sound was too deliberate, too measured. "That ain't no animal," Marge hissed, her face pale beneath her tan. "Jacob," she suddenly called out, her voice echoing among the trees. The dragging sound stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like physical pressure. "Let's keep moving," I said, resting my hand on the butt of my service pistol. Standard procedure prohibited drawing a weapon without clear threat, but my fingers itched to feel the reassuring weight of the Glock. The trail began to slope upward, leading toward the ridge Marge had mentioned. As we climbed, the forest changed again. The trees here were different, stunted, twisted, their bark blackened as if by fire. Yet there had been no forest fires in this area for decades. "This doesn't look right," Marge murmured, glancing around with growing anxiety. The trees were never like this before. She was right. Something was wrong with this section of forest. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, too soft, and the air had taken on a foul odor, like meat left too long in the sun. I was about to suggest turning back when Marge gasped, pointing ahead. "Look." About 30 yards ahead, something glinted in the dappled light. Moving closer, I recognized the metallic housing of a trail camera, or what remained of one. The device had been violently smashed, its plastic casing cracked open, the electronic components scattered across the ground. Next to it, a second camera lay similarly destroyed. "These are Jacob's," Marge whispered, picking up a fragment with trembling fingers. "He saved up for months to buy them." I knelt to examine the destruction more carefully. The cameras hadn't just fallen or been damaged by weather. They'd been deliberately destroyed, with considerable force. The metal housing was bent and twisted, the memory card snapped in half. "What could do this?" Marge asked, her voice small. Before I could answer, I noticed something else, a depression in the soft ground beside the ruined cameras. A footprint, but unlike any I'd seen before. It was roughly human in shape, but far too large, at least 16 inches long. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was extraordinarily heavy. Most disturbing were the toe marks, elongated, with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. "Marge," I said quietly, "I need you to go back to the house." "I'm not leaving without Jacob," she replied immediately. "I'm not asking you to, but I need to call this in, get more deputies out here, and..." I hesitated. "If there's something dangerous in these woods, I need to know you're safe." She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, looking at the massive footprint. Whatever maternal instinct had driven her this far was now battling with raw fear. "You'll find him?" she finally asked. "I promise I'll do everything I can." After providing Marge with clear directions back to the trail, I watched until she was out of sight, then reached for my radio. Only static answered my call, the dense forest blocking transmission. I'd have to go deeper alone, at least until I found Jacob, or reached higher ground where I could radio for backup. Following the disturbed vegetation and occasional massive footprints, I moved away from the established trail. The forest grew increasingly strange. Vines hung from branches like bloated snakes. Fungi in colors I'd never seen before, sickly yellows and pulsing purples, clustered around tree trunks. The ground squelched with every step, though it hadn't rained in weeks. The smell grew worse, a stench of rot and decay that made my eyes water. I pulled my shirt collar over my nose, breathing through the fabric. The trail of destruction was clear now, broken branches, disturbed earth, and occasional smears of what looked disturbingly like blood. About a quarter mile from where I'd found the cameras, I heard it again. The dragging sound, closer now, thump drag, thump drag. It was coming from beyond a dense thicket of thorny bushes. Drawing my pistol, I moved as quietly as possible, circling around to approach from downwind. The thorns caught at my uniform, drawing pinpricks of blood from my exposed hands. I ignored the stinging, focused entirely on what might wait beyond. As I pushed through the last barrier of underbrush, I emerged into a small clearing and froze in horror. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its massive trunk split down the middle as if struck by lightning. But it wasn't the tree that stopped me cold. It was what hung from its branches, animal carcasses, dozens of them, suspended by their hind legs from the higher branches. Deer, coyotes, raccoons, all skinned and gutted, their empty eye sockets staring blindly. Below them, a massive figure crouched, its back to me. The creature, for I could not think of it as human, stood at least 7 feet tall, its hunched form covered in mottled gray skin that seemed to shift and ripple over prominent bones. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with curved claws. It was methodically sorting through what appeared to be internal organs, arranging them in patterns on the ground. I stood paralyzed, my pistol half raised. Training and experience abandoned me in the face of something so utterly outside my understanding. As if sensing my presence, the creature went still. Then, with deliberate slowness, it began to turn. Before I could see its face, instinct took over. I ducked back into the underbrush, moving as silently as possible, putting distance between myself and the clearing. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain it would give me away. 15 years of law enforcement had never prepared me for this. When I felt I'd gone far enough, I checked my bearings. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, the forest growing darker by the minute. I needed to find Jacob and get out before nightfall. The creature in the clearing hadn't been dragging anything when I spotted it, which meant either Jacob had escaped or something worse. A new sound broke the silence, a faint, rhythmic thumping, like a distant drum. It seemed to come from every direction at once, resonating through the ground beneath my feet. As the sound grew stronger, I noticed something else. The trees around me were changing. Their bark rippled like liquid, patterns forming and dissolving, symbols and faces appearing momentarily before melting away again. I blinked hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks, but the phenomenon continued, the forest itself seeming to shift and breathe around me. The thumping grew louder, faster, matching the frantic pace of my heart. That's when I saw it, a structure through the trees, not the natural formation of a cave or hollowed log, but something built, a cabin, small and weathered, nearly swallowed by the forest. No such cabin should exist here. I knew these woods, and no structure had stood in this area in living memory. Yet there it was, its windows dark, empty sockets, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges, and leading to that door, a trail of blood, still wet enough to glisten in the fading light. The cabin crouched in the gathering twilight like something alive and malevolent. Rotted timber, blackened with age, formed walls that seemed to bow outward at impossible angles. The roof sagged in the middle, partially collapsed on one side. No chimney, no windows, just gaping holes where glass might once have been. The entire structure was wrong, an architectural obscenity that violated basic principles of construction. No building permits had ever been issued for this part of the forest. No roads led here, no trails marked on any map. By all logic, the cabin couldn't exist, yet it squatted before me, undeniable in its physical reality. The blood trail led directly to the crooked door, which hung partially open on a single rusted hinge. Darkness oozed from the interior, absolute and impenetrable. Even the late afternoon sunlight seemed unable to penetrate that threshold. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back the way I'd come, to bring reinforcements, but Jacob Downing might be inside, might still be alive. I couldn't abandon him to whatever waited in that unholy structure. I activated my flashlight, its beam pathetically inadequate against the surrounding darkness. With my pistol in my right hand and flashlight in my left, I approached the cabin, moving sideways to present the smallest possible target. "Jacob?" I called, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the unnatural silence. "Jacob Downing? This is Deputy Perks. If you can hear me, make a sound." No response. I reached the doorway and paused, listening intently. From inside came a soft, rhythmic sound, wet and organic, like something being methodically torn apart. My mouth went dry. I swung around the doorframe in one fluid motion, pistol leading the way, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The smell hit me immediately. Copper and rot, decay and feces, so powerful it triggered my gag reflex. I swallowed hard against the rising bile and forced myself to assess the interior. The cabin consisted of a single room, perhaps 15 feet square. The walls, I now saw, were covered in symbols. Hundreds of them, carved into the wood with precision that belied the cabin's overall decay. They resembled no language or pictographic system I'd ever encountered. Some appeared to be anatomical drawings of internal organs, others suggested astronomical configurations, still others defied categorization entirely. The floor was bare earth, tamped, smooth over generations. In the center of the room lay a crude table fashioned from a single massive slab of stone. The surface was stained dark with what could only be blood, fresh and old, layers upon layers of it. Scattered around the room were artifacts that made no sense in context. A child's teddy bear, blackened with age, a collection of antique hand tools arranged in a perfect circle, a stack of ledger books whose pages were filled with the same indecipherable symbols that covered the walls. And there, in the far corner, nearly hidden in shadow, was what remained of Jacob Downing. The boy's body had been arranged with terrible precision, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. His chest cavity had been opened, the ribs broken outward like the petals of some nightmarish flower. Most of the internal organs were missing, with only the heart remaining, placed carefully beside the body. Jacob's eyes were open, fixed in an expression of pure terror. Professional detachment failed me. I dropped to my knees, vomiting violently onto the earthen floor. 15 years of law enforcement, including accident scenes and suicide cleanup, had never prepared me for this level of methodical brutality. When the spasms subsided, I forced myself back to my feet, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I had to document the scene, had to preserve evidence, had to. A sound behind me. The soft scrape of something heavy being dragged across earth. I spun, weapon raised, and found myself face to face with the creature from the clearing. In the confined space of the cabin, its true dimensions became apparent. Nearly 8 feet tall, it had to stoop to avoid the low ceiling. Its proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow, joints bending in directions human anatomy wouldn't allow. The skin was a mottled gray, stretched taut over a framework that resembled a skeleton but with additional structures protruding at odd angles. But it was the face that destroyed any hope of rational explanation. Where a face should be was instead a collection of features that shifted and rearranged themselves continuously. Eyes appeared and disappeared, mouths opened in impossible locations, only to seal themselves and reappear elsewhere. The only constants were the teeth, hundreds of them, needle-sharp and gleaming with saliva, visible in every momentary mouth that formed. The creature cocked its ever-changing head, studying me with an intelligence that was unmistakable. In one elongated hand it held what appeared to be Jacob's liver, partly consumed. Training took over where conscious thought failed. I fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Center mass. The bullets struck with wet thuds, black ichor spraying from the impact points. The creature staggered back, more in surprise than pain. It looked down at the wounds, then back at me, and made a sound, a clicking, rattling noise that might have been laughter. It moved with blistering speed, covering the distance between us in a single bound. One massive hand knocked the gun from my grip, the other closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. The creature brought me close to its face, which now consisted primarily of a massive circular mouth, lined with concentric rows of teeth. Hot, fetid breath washed over me, carrying the stench of carrion. With my remaining strength, I drove my flashlight into one of the creature's eyes, a solid blow that should have caused significant damage. The eye simply closed, the flesh flowing around the impact point like liquid, then reopened once the threat had passed. The creature's grip tightened, darkness clouding the edges of my vision. In desperation, I reached for my belt, fingers closing around the canister of pepper spray, standard issue, rarely used. I aimed directly at the shifting face and emptied the entire canister. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The creature released me, emitting a high-pitched keening sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. It clawed at its face, the flesh rippling and bubbling as if the chemical spray had triggered some catastrophic reaction. It thrashed blindly, crashing into walls with enough force to shake the entire structure. I scrambled away, locating my fallen pistol. I ejected the spent magazine, slammed in my spare, and emptied all 15 rounds into the creature's writhing form. Black fluid erupted from multiple wounds, splattering the walls and ceiling. The thing's movements grew more erratic. its shifting form beginning to lose cohesion. With a final, bone-rattling screech, it collapsed to the floor, its body convulsing. The flesh seemed to melt, flowing like wax, revealing glimpses of an internal structure that defied biological classification. For several minutes it continued to twitch and dissolve, until finally it lay still, a misshapen mass of tissue and bone-like structures, leaking black fluid into the earthen floor. I remained frozen, guns still aimed at the motionless form, unable to process what I had just witnessed. Eventually, training reasserted itself. I needed to secure the scene, document evidence, report to headquarters. But how could I possibly explain this? What report could capture the reality of what lay before me? As I struggled with these questions, I became aware of a new sound, a low humming emanating from the symbols carved into the walls. They were beginning to glow with a sickly phosphorescence, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. The air in the cabin grew thick, charged with an energy I could feel on my skin. I had to get out. Whatever was happening, whatever the creature had been, whatever rituals it had performed in this place, none of it conformed to the reality I understood. I needed backup, needed experts, needed something beyond the resources of a small-town sheriff's department. After photographing the scene with my department-issued camera, evidence that would later prove useless, I gathered what remained of Jacob. The boy deserved better than to be left in this place of nightmares. With his body cradled in my arms, I backed toward the door, unwilling to take my eyes off the creature's remains. As I reached the threshold, a final, impossible thing occurred. The creature's flesh began to move again, not with the animation of life, but with a purpose of its own. It flowed across the floor like quicksilver, toward the symbols on the walls. As it touched each carving, the glow intensified until the entire cabin was bathed in sickly light. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, Jacob's remains clutched to my chest, the weight barely registering through the surge of adrenaline. Behind me, the humming grew to a fever pitch, then cut off abruptly. A shockwave of force struck my back, sending me stumbling forward but not falling. When I finally dared to look back, the cabin was engulfed in blue-green flames that gave off no heat and consumed the structure with unnatural speed. Within minutes, nothing remained but scorched earth in a perfect circle, as if the cabin and all evidence of its existence had been erased from reality. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, night had fallen completely. The sheriff's cruiser was parked beside my own, lights flashing, painting the trees with alternating red and blue. Sheriff Holloway stood with Marge Downing, both looking toward the forest with expressions of grim anticipation. When they saw me emerge carrying Jacob's broken body, Marge's scream shattered the night, a sound of pure maternal agony that would haunt my dreams for years to come. Sheriff Holloway moved quickly, supporting her as she collapsed, while shouting orders into his radio. I said nothing as I laid Jacob's remains gently on the ground. There were no words adequate to explain what had happened, what I'd seen, what I'd killed. The official report would later call it a bear attack, the only explanation that could be made to fit the evidence while maintaining the fragile illusion of a rational world. But the three of us who ventured back into those woods the next day, Sheriff Holloway, Deputy Collins, and myself, we knew better. We saw the perfect circle of scorched earth where no cabin had ever officially existed. We found no trace of the creature's remains, and we discovered, at the center of the burned circle, a single symbol carved into the ground, identical to those that had covered the cabin walls, somehow untouched by the mysterious fire. Some truths are too terrible for official reports. Some horrors too profound for public knowledge. In the end, we did what small-town law enforcement has always done when confronted with the inexplicable. We buried it deep, protected our community from knowledge that would only bring terror, and carried the burden ourselves. But I knew then, standing in that perfect circle of destruction, that Marlington would never be the same, that I would never be the same. Something had awakened in our woods, something ancient and patient and hungry, something that might be temporarily defeated but never truly destroyed. And worst of all, I couldn't shake the certainty that it wasn't alone. The official story was simple enough. Jacob Downing, 16, killed by a bear while setting up trail cameras in the state forest. A tragedy, but a straightforward one. Bears were rare in our part of Ohio, but not unheard of. The explanation satisfied the state wildlife officials, the coroner from the neighboring county, and the newspaper reporters who descended briefly on our town, like curious vultures. Only 3 people knew the truth: Sheriff Holloway, myself, and Marge Downing, who had seen enough to understand that no bear had taken her son. By unspoken agreement, we maintained the fiction. What purpose would the truth serve, except to terrify a community that was already grieving? The day after finding Jacob, we returned to the site of the cabin. Sheriff Holloway insisted on bringing Deputy Collins as backup, though I warned him it might complicate our containment of the situation. Collins was young, only 2 years on the force, by the book and eager to prove himself. "We need the manpower," Holloway had said firmly. "And if there's more of those things out there, I want armed backup." I couldn't argue with his logic, though I dreaded trying to explain to Collins what we might encounter. As it happened, my concerns were unnecessary. When we reached the scorched circle where the cabin had stood, Collins stared at it with puzzled incomprehension. "Someone had a campfire here?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. Sheriff Holloway and I exchanged glances. Collins was looking directly at the perfect circle of blackened earth, at the symbol carved in its center, yet he seemed unable to perceive anything unusual about it. "Something like that," Holloway replied carefully. "Go check the perimeter. Make sure there's no other evidence." Once Collins was out of earshot, I knelt beside the symbol. It resembled something like a stylized eye, with tendrils radiating outward, similar to the markings I'd seen inside the cabin, but larger and more complex. "He can't see it," I said quietly. "Not really." Holloway nodded grimly. "Saw the same thing with my wife when we found those cave paintings out by Miller's Ridge in '89. Some folks just can't perceive certain things. Maybe their minds won't let them." "You've seen something like this before?" I asked sharply. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, staring at the symbol. "Not like this exactly, but things that don't fit. Things that shouldn't exist." He met my gaze. "This county has always had its secrets, Perks. Most of the time they stay buried deep. Sometimes they surface." "And what do we do when they surface?" "We put them back where they belong," he said with finality. "We protect our people from knowing things that won't do them any good to know." We spent hours documenting the scene, though no official report would ever include our findings. The symbol in the earth defied all attempts to disturb it. Shovels broke against it, dirt thrown on top slid away, water poured over it evaporated instantly. Yet it was no physical material we could identify, just a pattern somehow burned permanently into the ground itself. Most disturbing were the tracks we found leading away from the circle, the same massive clawed footprints I'd seen earlier, but now they contained an oily black residue that smoked faintly when touched. The tracks led deeper into the forest, eventually disappearing where the undergrowth became too dense to follow. "Whatever it was," Holloway said as we prepared to leave, "it's still out there." "I shot it," I insisted. "Emptied a full magazine into it. I saw it die, or thought I did. Maybe you killed it, maybe you just heard it. Either way, something left these tracks after the fact." He surveyed the darkening forest with narrowed eyes. "We'll need to monitor this area, quietly." In the days that followed, I threw myself into research, searching for anything that might explain what I'd encountered. The county library yielded nothing but local legends of forest devils and skinwalkers, stories dismissed as Native American mythology or settler superstition. The internet, still in its infancy in 1998, offered wild conspiracy theories, but nothing substantive. My most promising lead came from Professor Elaine Matheson at the State University, an anthropologist specializing in Ohio Valley indigenous cultures. When I faxed her a carefully rendered drawing of the symbol, her response was immediate and troubling. "Where did you find this?" she demanded when I called her back. "This exact configuration?" I gave her a sanitized version of events, strange markings found at an abandoned campsite, possibly connected to illegal hunting activities. Her silence told me she wasn't buying it. "Deputy Perks," she finally said, "this symbol belongs to no known indigenous tradition in North America. However, I've seen very similar iconography in only one other context, a collection of artifacts recovered from a cave system in southern Ohio in the 1920s, artifacts that subsequently disappeared from the university collection under mysterious circumstances." "What were they?" "The artifacts? Stone tablets primarily, covered in symbols like this one. According to the field notes, they were found arranged in a circle around what appeared to be an altar of some kind." She paused. "The expedition that discovered them suffered an unusually high mortality rate afterward. Accidents, suicides, unexplained illnesses. Within 5 years, all 8 members were dead." A chill ran down my spine. "Do you have any theories about what the symbols mean?" The prevailing theory at the time was that they represented a language, possibly that of a pre-Columbian culture previously unknown to archaeology. My own research suggests something different. Another pause. "I believe they're operational." "What does that mean, operational?" "Like mathematical formulas or chemical equations. They don't just represent ideas. They're designed to produce effects, to change reality." I thanked her for her insights and promised to keep her updated on any new findings. A promise I had no intention of keeping. The last thing we needed was academic interest bringing attention to Marlington's woods. A week after finding Jacob, the nightmares began. In them, I was back in the cabin, but the roles were reversed. I was strapped to the stone table, chest splayed open, while the creature methodically removed my organs. Yet I remained conscious, watching as each piece of me was arranged in patterns that somehow made terrible sense. The creature spoke to me in these dreams, not with words, but with concepts that infected my mind like viruses. I woke from these nightmares, drenched in sweat, certain that the symbols from the cabin walls had been tattooed on my skin. It would take minutes of frantic checking in the bathroom mirror to convince myself they weren't there, at least not visibly. Diane noticed the change in me, of course, the jumpiness, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd fallen to checking the locks 3 or 4 times each night. "It's the Downing boy, isn't it?" she asked one evening, finding me sitting in the dark living room at 3 a.m., my service weapon on the side table. "Ilias, you need to talk to someone. This isn't healthy." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just having trouble sleeping." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you found him." She sat beside me, taking my hand. "Whatever you saw out there." "I can't, Diane." My voice broke. "I can't talk about it." She studied my face in the dim light, then nodded slowly. In 15 years of marriage, she'd learned when not to push. "Just remember you're not alone, okay? Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it by yourself." But I was alone, in the way that mattered most. Sheriff Holloway was the only other person who truly understood what we were dealing with, and even he hadn't seen the creature up close, hadn't killed it, or thought he had, hadn't felt its hot breath against his face, or seen the intelligence behind its ever-shifting features. 2 weeks after finding Jacob, Holloway and I established a rotation of forest patrols. We couldn't maintain a constant presence. Our department was too small, with only 6 deputies covering the entire county. But we could check the burn circle and surrounding area every few days. Deputy Collins and the others were told we were monitoring for bear activity following the tragic attack. On my 3rd patrol, I found something that shattered any hope this nightmare might be over. At the center of the burn circle, where the single symbol had been, I now found 3, the original plus 2 new ones, equally resistant to disturbance. Around them, the earth appeared to be changing. The soil had taken on an oily sheen, and strange fungi grew in concentric rings, species I couldn't identify. More troubling were the offerings. Small dead animals, squirrels, rabbits, a raccoon, carefully arranged around the circle. Their bodies had been opened and positioned in patterns that echoed the symbols. This wasn't the work of our creature. The precision was there, but the scale was wrong. These were small killings, ritual practice. Human killings. That night, I finally told Sheriff Holloway my darkest fear. It's not just the creature we need to worry about. I think it has followers, human followers. We were sitting in his truck, parked at the edge of the forest. Rain pattered on the roof, creating a white noise barrier against potential eavesdroppers. "You sure?" he asked, though his expression told me he'd suspected the same. "The offerings are too small for the creature to have bothered with, and they're recent, within the last 24 hours each time I've found them." I rubbed my face, exhaustion bone deep. "Someone in Marlington is continuing its work." Holloway lit a cigarette, the match briefly illuminating his weathered face. "Could be kids. Copycats who found the site and thought it would be fun to leave their own sick contributions. And the new symbols? The changes to the soil? The fungi that shouldn't exist in this ecosystem?" I shook my head. "This is coordinated, deliberate, someone who knows what they're doing. Or something teaching them what to do," Holloway said quietly. The implication hung between us, too terrible to voice directly. If the creature hadn't died, if it was still out there, still hunting, it might have found more receptive prey than Jacob, prey willing to listen, to learn, to serve. "We need to find them," I said finally, "before they progress from squirrels to something bigger." Holloway nodded grimly. "I'll pull the records, see if there's been any unusual activity reported in the area, any strangers in town, any locals showing behavior changes. And if we find them..." He didn't answer immediately, taking a long drag on his cigarette. "Let's cross that bridge when we come to it." But we both knew that some bridges, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Some actions, once taken, would change us forever, perhaps as profoundly as the symbols were changing the earth around them. As I drove home that night, the rain having given way to an oppressive humidity, I found myself turning over the professor's words in my mind. Operational symbols, designed to produce effects, to change reality. What changes were being wrought in Marlington, and how far would they spread before we could stop them? The answer came sooner and more terribly than I could have imagined. The first human victim appeared exactly 1 month after Jacob Downing's death. Linda Mercer, 68, lived alone in a small cottage on the northern edge of the forest. When she failed to show up for her weekly bridge game, her friends called the sheriff's office. I was the one who found her. The cottage door stood wide open, which was the first warning sign. Linda was meticulous about security, having been burglarized the previous year. Inside, the cottage was immaculate as always. Linda had been a housekeeper for the county's wealthiest families before retirement, and old habits died hard. Nothing seemed disturbed or out of place. No signs of struggle or forced entry. Just Linda's reading glasses on the side table, her half-finished cup of tea, a book opened and placed face down on the armrest of her favorite chair. The only thing missing was Linda herself. I found her in the garden shed. She'd been arranged just as Jacob had. Chest cavity opened, organs removed with surgical precision. But there were differences too. Symbols had been carved into her skin, still seeping blood, indicating the cuts were made while she was alive. Her eyes had been removed, the empty sockets packed with a black, oily substance that matched what I'd seen in the footprints at the burn circle. Most disturbing of all was her expression. Despite the mutilation, despite what must have been excruciating pain, Linda Mercer appeared to be smiling. I radioed Sheriff Holloway directly rather than going through dispatch. "We've got another one," was all I needed to say. He understood immediately. By the time he arrived, I'd secured the scene and done a preliminary sweep of the property. In the soft earth behind the shed, I found what I was looking for: footprints. 2 sets. One matched the massive prints from the forest. The other was human, average size, probably male based on the shape. "They're working together now," Holloway said grimly, studying the prints. "The creature and whoever it's recruited." "We need to close the forest," I insisted. "Set up checkpoints, warn people." "And tell them what, exactly?" Holloway interrupted. "That there's a monster in the woods recruiting townspeople for ritual killings, that we've known about it for a month and did nothing? We did what we could. We covered it up." His voice cracked like a whip. "We called it a bear attack, filed our reports, and hoped the problem would solve itself. And now Linda Mercer is dead because of it." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. He was right. We'd prioritized keeping the town calm over keeping it safe. And now we had another body, another life destroyed by whatever malevolence had taken root in our forest. "So what do we do?" I asked quietly. Holloway's weathered face hardened with determination. "We hunt it down. Tonight. No reports, no backup, no paper trail. Just you and me. And if we find its human partner?" The look he gave me was answer enough. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. We spent the day preparing, gathering equipment from the department's meager tactical supplies: shotguns, body armor, night vision gear signed out under the pretense of a drug raid. I added several canisters of pepper spray to my kit, remembering how the creature had reacted to the chemical. By sunset, we were in position at the forest's edge, dressed in dark clothing, weapons loaded. The plan was simple: head directly to the burn circle, which we now believed served as some kind of anchor or focal point for the creature's activities. If it had established a pattern, it would return there, possibly with its human accomplice. The forest at night was a different entity altogether. Shadows moved independently of their sources, tree branches reached out like grasping hands, and every natural sound seemed distorted, threatening. The burn circle itself had expanded since my last visit, now nearly 20 feet in diameter, the earth within it black and slick like crude oil. The symbols had multiplied again, now forming a complex arrangement that extended from the center to the edge of the circle. They pulsed with faint bioluminescence, casting an eerie blue-green glow that was just bright enough to read by. "Jesus," Holloway whispered, scanning the circle with his night vision goggles. "It's growing." We positioned ourselves downwind, concealed in the dense underbrush about 30 yards from the circle, and then we waited. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Midnight came and went. The forest grew colder, the summer heat dissipating under a clear, star-filled sky. Around 2 a.m., I was beginning to wonder if we'd miscalculated when Sheriff Holloway nudged me, pointing silently toward the opposite side of the clearing. A figure emerged from the trees, human in size and shape, moving with purpose rather than fear. In the ghostly light of the symbols, I recognized him immediately. David Kerner, the high school biology teacher. He'd lived in Marlington for nearly a decade, respected but never fully integrated into the community. Always a bit of an outsider, a bit too intellectual for our rural sensibilities. Kerner approached the circle reverently, kneeling at its edge. From a backpack he removed several objects, Small animal carcasses, jars containing what looked like blood, notebooks filled with cramped writing. He arranged them carefully around the outermost symbols, consulting his notes frequently, muttering under his breath. I glanced at Holloway, who had his shotgun trained on Kerner. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. We needed to understand what was happening, needed to see if the creature would appear. After completing his arrangements, Kerner removed a knife from his pack, not a hunting knife or kitchen implement, but something older, cruder, its blade crudely hammered from what appeared to be meteoric iron. He held it aloft, began chanting in a language I'd never heard, all harsh consonants and guttural stops. The symbols flared brighter in response, their light pulsing in rhythm with his words. The ground within the circle began to bubble and shift, like liquid rather than solid earth, and from its center, something began to emerge. Not the creature I'd encountered in the cabin. This was different, smaller but no less terrifying. It resembled a human infant in general shape, but with proportions all wrong, limbs too long, fingers too numerous. Its skin was translucent, internal organs visible through the membrane, pulsing with unearthly light. Kerner's chanting reached a crescendo as the thing pulled itself fully from the earth. He prostrated himself before it, offering the knife handle first. The infant thing reached for it with two long fingers, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a puppet with tangled strings. That's when Holloway fired. A deafening blast in the night silence. The shotgun round struck the creature dead center, tearing through its translucent flesh. Instead of blood, a viscous blue-black fluid sprayed across the symbols, which flared painfully bright in response. The creature emitted no sound, but Kerner screamed, a howl of rage and anguish that contained nothing human. He whirled toward our position, eyes reflecting the symbol light like a predator's. In one fluid motion, he raised the iron knife and slashed his own throat, releasing a torrent of blood onto the wounded creature and the surrounding symbols. What happened next defied comprehension. The blood didn't pool or spread. It flowed upward, defying gravity, forming tendrils that connected the symbols in a complex three-dimensional web. The wounded creature began to change, absorbing both Kerner's blood and its own leaking fluids. It grew, reshaped itself, developed features that shifted and flowed just like the creature I'd encountered in the cabin. "It's being born," I whispered in horror. "It's taking his form." Holloway fired again, and again, each blast temporarily disrupting the transformation but failing to halt it. I added my own fire, emptying my pistol into the morphing mass. The creature, now nearly human-sized, staggered under the impacts but continued its metamorphosis. In desperation, I reached for one of the incendiary grenades we'd brought. Technically illegal for law enforcement use, acquired by Holloway through channels he refused to discuss. I pulled the pin, counted 2 seconds, and threw it directly into the center of the circle. The explosion was blinding, the heat intense enough to singe my eyebrows despite the distance. The creature screeched, a sound like metal tearing, as flames engulfed it and the symbol inscribed earth around it. The fire burned unnaturally bright, with colors that didn't belong in normal combustion. Blues, greens, purple swirling through the conventional orange and yellow. For several minutes the flames raged out of control, threatening to spread to the surrounding forest. Then, as suddenly as they had flared, they died, collapsing inward, as if being sucked into the earth itself. Where the burn circle had been was now a perfect hemisphere of glass-like material. The ground melted and reformed by heat no conventional fire could produce. Of the creature and Kerner, nothing recognizable remained, just a layer of ash atop the glassy surface, already being dispersed by the night breeze. Holloway approached cautiously, shotgun still at the ready. I followed, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. The scorched area was completely inert now. No symbols, no pulsing light, no sense of wrongness that had pervaded the place before. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. Holloway didn't answer immediately, studying the glassy surface with narrowed eyes. "No," he finally said. "It's contained, maybe, but not over." He was right, of course. The next day, during the official investigation of what was reported as a forest fire of unknown origin, we discovered additional symbol sites at 3 locations in the county, smaller than the original but growing. David Kerner was reported missing, his disappearance connected to Linda Mercer's murder only in the minds of those who knew the truth. Over the following months, Sheriff Holloway and I continued our covert operations, locating and destroying these satellite growth sites before they could mature. We found 5 more Marlington residents who showed signs of the creature's influence, subtle physical changes, obsessive drawing of symbols, nocturnal journeys into the forest. 3 we managed to detain and isolate in psychiatric facilities under various pretexts. 2. We were forced to kill when they became violent, their transformations too advanced to reverse. The winter of 1998-1999 was the coldest on record for our county. The deep freeze seemed to slow the spread, giving us time to establish a monitoring system and protocols for identifying new outbreaks. By spring, we dared to hope the worst was behind us. Then Sheriff Holloway failed to show up for work one day in early April. I found him in his home, seated at his kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him, his service weapon in his hand. He'd left a note, addressed to me personally. "It's in my head now, Elias. I see the symbols when I close my eyes. I hear its voice when I try to sleep. I won't become one of them. I won't be used to bring more of them through. You know what needs to be done. Burn it all if you have to." I reported it as a suicide, the tragic result of depression following his wife's death the previous year. No one questioned it too closely. Law enforcement suicides were sadly common, and Holloway had been showing signs of strain that even those who didn't know the truth could recognize. That was 27 years ago. I'm sheriff now, have been since 2005. Marlington has changed, grown smaller as young people leave for opportunities elsewhere, the remaining population aging, turning inward. The forest has expanded, reclaiming abandoned farms and homesteads. New growth, thick and lush, obscuring what lies beneath. I still patrol the original site personally, once a month. The glass surface remains unchanged, neither growing nor diminishing. But in the woods around it, I sometimes find new symbols, carved into trees formed from arranged stones, once even painted in what laboratory analysis confirmed was human blood. Something sleeps beneath Marlington, something ancient and patient. The creature in the cabin was just its herald, its scout, a tiny piece of a consciousness vast beyond human comprehension. What emerged that night in the burn circle was meant to be its child, a hybrid that could walk among us undetected, seeding our world for what would follow. We stopped it, or delayed it, at least. But the barrier between worlds has been thinned here, the membrane made permeable. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the forest, time and space seem to fold, revealing glimpses of somewhere else, a landscape of impossible geometry, populated by shapes that hurt the mind to perceive. I've trained my deputies as best I can, established protocols for containing new outbreaks. A few know portions of the truth, enough to be vigilant, not enough to be paralyzed by fear. When I retire, or when death finally claims me, someone else will take up the watch. The burden will be passed, the secret kept. Because that's what we do in small towns like Marlington. We protect our own. We bury our secrets deep, and we stand guard against the darkness, even when no one else knows it's there. So if you're ever driving through Northeast Ohio, and you see a sign for Marlington, keep going. Don't stop for gas. Don't look for a place to stay the night. The diner food isn't that good, the people aren't that friendly, and the rooms at our one motel are overpriced and underheated. Above all, stay out of our woods. What walks there isn't looking for tourists or transients. It's looking for believers, for disciples, for those who will open themselves to its whispered promises. And once you've heard those whispers, once you've seen the symbols in your dreams, you belong to it forever. I know, because I hear them too. Every night since I found Jacob Downing in that impossible cabin. Every night for 27 years. The whispers, the symbols, the truths no human mind was meant to grasp. I've resisted so far. I've remained myself, remained human. But I'm getting older, getting tired. And it's so patient, so persistent. Sometimes I understand why Holloway took the path he did. Sometimes, the whispers are almost too beautiful to resist. But I made a promise, to Marge Downing, to Linda Mercer, to all the others who've fallen victim over the years. I promised to keep watch, to maintain the barrier, to remember that behind the mask of the stars lies something that watches us with hungry interest. So I patrol, I monitor, I burn what needs burning, bury what needs burying, and I wait for the day when something finally emerges that can't be stopped with shotguns and fire. When the membrane tears completely, and what waits beyond spills through. Until then, Marlington endures, the forest grows, and I remain at my post, the last guardian of a threshold that should never have been crossed. The whispers tell me that day is coming soon. Somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, there's a 2-lane highway that never seems to end. Just asphalt stretching out like a thread through miles of flat, empty land. This was where I found myself, driving a rig loaded with grain. No one else wanted to make the run, probably because it was so damn lonely. But I was never one to shy away from isolation. I took it, figured it would give me some peace of mind. I've been driving trucks for nearly 2 decades now. It suits me. Just me, the road, and an engine that hums as steady as the thoughts in my head. Sure, I've seen some wild stuff in my time, but nothing ever stuck with me. It's like being on the road strips you of those things. You just move on to the next job, the next delivery. This particular stretch of highway, though, it did something to me. Still think about it now and then, late at night when the world goes quiet. The early October morning was mild, the sun barely cresting the horizon as I fired up the engine of my Peterbilt. The terminal manager, Russo, had given me the paperwork with a look that said he was glad it wasn't him making the trip. 300 miles of nothing but corn and sky. Green, he said, scratching his beard. You sure you want this run? I just shrugged. Money's the same whether the view's pretty or not. Russo laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Yeah, well, some of the boys refuse to take that route anymore. Say it gets to them somehow. You believe in ghost stories, Russo? I asked, tucking the paperwork into my jacket. I believe in keeping my sanity, he replied. That stretch of road, there's something about the emptiness that messes with your head. I've never been one for superstition. 20 years on the road teaches you that most fears are just your mind playing tricks. Loneliness does things to people, makes them see what isn't there, hear things in the wind that's just wind. I've known drivers who quit because they couldn't handle the solitude. Said they started seeing shadows moving in the rear view. Not me. I find comfort in being alone. At least, I used to. The first few hours on the road were uneventful. I had the radio on, playing some old Johnny Cash tunes. The landscape rolled by, endless cornfields swaying in the autumn breeze. There's a hypnotic quality to driving across the Great Plains, the horizon never changing, just miles of sameness. You get lost in your head. Around noon, I pulled into a small truck stop for fuel and coffee. The place was nearly empty save for a few locals having lunch at the counter. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, filled my thermos without saying much. Long way to Kansas City, she said finally, glancing at my manifest sitting on the counter. Long way anywhere from here, I replied. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Be careful out there. Strange things happen on that stretch. I almost asked her what she meant, but decided against it. Every region has its local legends, its boogeyman stories. I'd heard them all before. Back on the road, the sky turned overcast, clouds rolling in from the west. The sudden dimness made everything look gray and lifeless. Perfect for driving, I thought. No distractions, just me and the road. But as the miles ticked by, I started to feel a growing unease. Nothing I could put my finger on, just a sensation, like being watched. I checked my mirrors. Nothing but empty road behind me, stretching back to the horizon. I turned the radio up louder, trying to drown out the silence that seemed to press in from all sides. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I first noticed the vehicle. Just a speck in my mirror at first, a small dark shape on the road far behind me. Nothing unusual about that. Other vehicles use these roads after all. But as the minutes passed, I realized the distance between us wasn't changing, not getting closer, not falling behind, just maintaining the same gap, like it was tethered to my truck by an invisible line. By 4 o'clock I could make out that it was a pickup truck, old, dark-colored, keeping pace about a quarter-mile back. The highway had been empty for miles, no exits, no towns, nowhere for anyone to go except straight ahead on this ribbon of asphalt. Probably just heading the same way, I said aloud, my voice sounding strange in the cab. But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The way it maintained that exact distance, never varying, never making a move to pass despite the empty road ahead. I took a swig of coffee, now cold and bitter. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the fields. In the gathering darkness, the headlights of the pickup glowed like patient eyes. I tried to dismiss the growing anxiety. Just another driver on a long, boring stretch of road. Nothing sinister about that. But my hands had tightened on the wheel, and I realized I was going 10 miles over the speed limit. I eased off the gas, watching the speedometer drop. In my mirror, the pickup slowed too. Exact same pace, exact same distance. That's when the first real chill settled into my bones. For the next hour, I tried to rationalize the situation. Coincidence. Maybe they were following the speed of my taillights, using me as a guide. Maybe I was overthinking the whole thing. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more aware I became of that constant presence behind me. As darkness fell completely, I flipped on the high beams, trying to penetrate the gloom that had settled across the landscape. The fields on either side of the highway seemed to absorb the light, creating a tunnel effect. Just me, my headlights, and a narrow strip of visible road disappearing into blackness ahead. And behind me those unwavering headlights, never closer, never farther away. I reached for my phone, but the signal had disappeared miles back. Out here, in the vast emptiness of rural Nebraska, I was alone. Alone, except for whatever was following me. The planned pit stop at the junction ahead couldn't come soon enough. Civilization, other people, bright lights, that's what I needed. The junction was just a small roadside gas station and diner, but it would be enough. The glowing sign appeared in the distance, a beacon in the darkness. Relief washed over me as I signaled and began to slow. In my mirror, the pickup's turn signal flashed on as well. The gas station's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the empty parking lot. Just two other vehicles, a battered station wagon and a semi parked for the night. I pulled my rig up to the diesel pump, glancing in my mirrors as I set the brake. The pickup truck turned in behind me, rolling slowly past the pumps before parking at the far end of the lot, headlights extinguished. In the sudden darkness, I couldn't make out the driver, just the silhouette of the vehicle, an old Ford maybe from the late 80s, its once blue paint faded to a dull gray. I stepped down from my cab, stretching my legs after hours of driving. The night air had turned cold, carrying the scent of distant rain. The silence out here was absolute, no traffic noise, no city hum, just the occasional creak of my cooling engine and the hollow whistle of wind across the flat landscape. The station attendant, a kid no older than 20, with acne-scarred cheeks, nodded at me through the window. I waved back, trying to appear casual as I began refueling. All the while, I kept my gaze fixed on the pickup, waiting for the driver to emerge. No one did. "You see that pickup come in?" I asked the attendant while paying for the fuel. He glanced up from his phone, looking past me to the parking lot. "That old Ford? Yeah. Pulls in here sometimes. Guy never comes inside, though." "You know who he is?" The kid shrugged. "Local, maybe? Don't pay much attention. Lot of strange folks pass through." I bought a fresh coffee and a shrink-wrap sandwich, then headed back to my truck. The diner attached to the gas station looked closed, its windows dark except for a single light above the door. As I climbed back into my cab, I noticed movement from the pickup, a figure shifting in the driver's seat. Still, no one emerged. I sat in my idling truck, eating the tasteless sandwich and considering my options. I could wait here, maybe try to sleep in the cab until morning, but that would put me behind schedule, and I had always prided myself on timely deliveries. The logical part of me said the whole thing was ridiculous. Just my imagination turning an ordinary coincidence into something sinister. 20 minutes later, I pulled back onto the highway, headlights cutting through the darkness. In my mirror, I watched the pickup's lights flick on. It followed me out of the lot, resuming its position a quarter-mile back. "All right," I muttered. "Let's see how committed you are." I increased my speed, pushing well above the limit. The pickup matched me. I slowed to a crawl. It slowed too. I tried varying my speed randomly. The pickup adjusted each time, maintaining that exact same distance. My heart pounded against my ribs. This wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't coincidence. Whatever, whoever, was behind me was deliberately following. I tried to think rationally. Highway robbers? No, they would have made their move at the gas station. Cops? Unmarked vehicles usually give themselves away sooner or later, and besides, they would have pulled me over already if they had cause. Some kind of prank? Seemed elaborate for a joke, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. The miles continued to unroll beneath my wheels. I passed a sign indicating my turnoff was 50 miles ahead. Not that far, in trucker terms. I could make it without stopping again. Whatever this game was, it would end when I reached my destination. An hour passed. The pickup remained. The darkness outside the cab seemed to deepen, pressing in against the windows. I found myself checking the locks on the doors, something I rarely bothered with on the open road. Then I saw it. A side road appearing on the right, unpaved but wide enough for my rig. It wasn't on my route map, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know if this was really happening. Without signaling, I cut the wheel hard, braking sharply as I took the turn. The maneuver was dangerous with a full load, but I executed it cleanly. The dirt road led straight into darkness, no visible destination. I killed my headlights and pulled to a stop about 50 yards from the highway, cutting the engine. Then I waited, watching the road I'd just left, half expecting the pickup to continue on its way. It didn't. The vehicle slowed as it approached the turnoff, then followed my path, headlights sweeping across the dirt road. I ducked down in my seat, heart hammering as the pickup rolled slowly past my position, continuing down the road. Once it was a safe distance ahead, I quietly restarted my engine, executed a careful turnaround, and headed back to the highway. A brief moment of triumph surged through me. I had shaken my pursuer. The feeling lasted exactly 6 minutes. I just settled back into my cruise speed when the headlights appeared in my mirror again. Impossible. There had been no other connecting roads, no way for the pickup to circle back and catch up so quickly. Yet there it was, maintaining that same distance, as if our brief detour had never happened. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I fumbled for my phone again, hoping against hope for a signal. Nothing. I was truly alone out here. "What do you want?" I shouted, though there was no one to hear me but myself. As if in response, the pickup's high beams flashed once, then returned to normal. My mouth went dry. For the next 2 hours, I drove in a state of heightened awareness, all senses focused on the road ahead and the presence behind. The few times other vehicles passed going the opposite direction, I considered flashing my lights or honking, trying to get their attention. But what would I say? That I was being followed? By a vehicle that hadn't made any aggressive moves, hadn't tried to run me off the road, or otherwise threaten me. It was nearly midnight when I saw the sign for Starling Grain Elevator. It loomed on the horizon, a massive silhouette against the night sky. I'd passed it on previous runs, a relic from a bygone era, abandoned years ago when the railroad changed routes. The facility sat about half a mile off the highway, connected by a service road. In that moment, I made a decision. This had gone on long enough. Whatever was happening, I needed to confront it directly. I signaled and turned off the highway toward the grain elevator. The service road was rough, neglected for years. My rig bounced and swayed as I navigated the potholes. Behind me, the pickup followed, headlights bouncing with each bump in the road. The grain elevator complex was larger than it appeared from the highway, a central silo reaching up like a concrete finger, surrounded by smaller outbuildings and loading docks. Everything was in an advanced state of decay, windows broken, metal rusted, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. I pulled into what had once been the main yard, positioning my rig so the headlights illuminated the open area. Then I shut down the engine and reached under my seat for the lockbox. The .357 revolver inside was cold to the touch, loaded with 6 rounds. I hadn't fired it in years, but the familiar weight was reassuring as I slipped it into my jacket pocket. The pickup truck rolled into the yard behind me, its headlights catching dust motes swirling in the night air. It came to a stop about 30 yards away, engine still running, lights still burning. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. I stood beside my truck, one hand in my pocket gripping the revolver, watching as a figure emerged from the pickup. The facility's abandoned yard stretched out between us, cracked concrete littered with decades of debris. The only sound was the idle of his engine and the distant moan of wind through the elevator's empty silo. He stepped fully into view, illuminated by his truck's headlights. My first coherent thought was how wrong he looked. The man was tall, easily 6'4", but unnaturally thin. His body seemed constructed of angles rather than curves, limbs too long for his torso, neck stretched like it had been pulled. He wore faded blue work clothes that hung from his frame, as if they belonged to someone much larger. His hair was long and lank, falling past his shoulders in greasy strands. But it was his face that made my stomach clench. Gaunt beyond mere thinness, his skin pulled so tight across his skull that it seemed ready to split at the cheekbones. His lips were bloodless cracks, his nose sharp and pronounced. His eyes? Those eyes were set deep in hollow sockets, yet somehow caught the light and reflected it back like an animal's. He began walking toward me, his gait smooth and unhurried. Each step perfectly measured, perfectly timed. He moved with the deliberate confidence of a predator that knows its prey can't escape. "That's far enough," I called out when he'd closed half the distance. My voice echoed off the concrete structures around us. "What do you want?" He didn't answer, didn't change his pace, didn't acknowledge that I'd spoken at all. "I'm armed," I warned, drawing the revolver but keeping it pointed at the ground. "Stop right there." Still, he advanced. 20 yards now. 15. I raised the gun, aiming at his chest. "Last warning. Stop or I'll shoot." Not a flicker of concern crossed his face. No fear, no hesitation. Just that same measured walk, closing the gap between us with mechanical precision. 10 yards. My finger tightened on the trigger. "Stop." He didn't. The first shot cracked through the night, the sound amplified by the surrounding structures. The bullet struck him in the left shoulder, the impact visibly jerking his body sideways. Blood bloomed dark against the blue fabric of his shirt. He staggered slightly but didn't fall, didn't cry out. His expression remained unchanged as he regained his balance and continued forward. Shock froze me for a crucial second. I've seen men wounded before. They scream, they collapse, they clutch at the injury. They don't just keep walking like nothing happened. I fired again. The shot hit him squarely in the chest, dead center. It should have stopped him cold, dropped him where he stood. Instead, he merely rocked back on his heels, swayed for a moment, then resumed his advance. A wave of pure terror washed over me. This wasn't possible. No one takes a round to the center mass and keeps coming. But the evidence was right there before my eyes, closing the distance between us with each mechanical step. Panic took over. I emptied the revolver. 4 shots in rapid succession. Each bullet found its mark. 2 more in the chest, 1 in the stomach, 1 in the throat. Blood sprayed from the wounds, black in the harsh headlights. His body jerked and twitched with each impact, but his expression never changed, and his feet kept moving. 7 yards. 6. 5. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. I stood rooted to the spot, gun still extended, watching this impossibility approach. His shirt was soaked with blood now, torn open by the bullet's exit wounds. I could see ragged holes in his flesh, yet still he walked. 4 yards. 3. Then something changed. His movements became less coordinated, his steps faltering. At 2 yards distance, he stopped completely. For a moment, we stood facing each other, me with my useless gun, him riddled with bullets that should have killed him instantly. His eyes found mine. There was awareness there, intelligence, something cognizant looking out from behind those reflective orbs. His bloodless lips parted slightly, as if he might speak. Instead, he collapsed, not a gradual folding, but a sudden release, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He hit the concrete with a sickening thud, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. I stood there, breathing hard, unable to process what had just happened. The revolver slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the ground. For several minutes I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the fact that I had just shot a man multiple times, and he had kept coming. Finally, caution overcame shock. I approached the fallen figure carefully, still half expecting him to rise again. He didn't move. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the cracked concrete. I crouched beside the body, my legs threatening to give way. Up close, the wrongness of him was even more apparent. His skin had an almost translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface, and covering nearly every exposed inch of flesh were markings, strange symbols carved into his skin like scars. Some of the markings appeared old, healed into white ridges. Others seemed fresher, the edges still pink and raised. They formed no pattern I could recognize, not letters or numbers, but deliberate shapes that seemed to flow into each other across the terrain of his body. I reached out, hesitating before touching his wrist, searching for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there. His flesh was cold, much colder than it should have been for someone so recently alive. As I drew back my hand, I noticed something clutched in his. Prying open the rigid fingers, I found a scrap of paper, folded and refolded until it was no larger than a postage stamp. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. A name was written there. My name. Harlan Green. Nothing else, just my name in spidery, cramped handwriting. The paper itself was worn thin at the creases, as if it had been opened and refolded countless times. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it all. Who was this man? Why had he followed me? How had he known my name? And most disturbing of all, how had he continued walking after taking multiple gunshots to vital areas? The distant wail of a siren cut through my thoughts. Someone must have heard the gunshots, perhaps a farmer or passerby on the highway. I hadn't even considered calling the police myself, but now they were coming. I stood up, stepping back from the body. The revolver lay where I'd dropped it. I made no move to retrieve it. Instead, I walked to the grain elevator's office building, a small structure adjacent to the main silo. The door hung partially open, the lock long since broken. Inside, dust covered everything. Desks, chairs, an ancient rotary phone mounted on the wall. To my surprise, the phone had a dial tone. I called 911, giving my location and a brief explanation. I'd been followed, confronted the person, and been forced to defend myself. The dispatcher told me to remain where I was, that officers were already en route. I returned to the yard, standing in the harsh glare of the pickup's headlights, which still burned despite everything. The body lay where it had fallen, a dark shape against the concrete. Blood continued to spread outward, reaching toward my boots. And I waited, trying not to look too closely at what I'd done, trying not to think about how he'd kept coming despite the bullets, trying not to wonder why my name was written on that scrap of paper. The sirens grew louder. The first police car arrived 14 minutes after my call, rolling into the yard with lights flashing but siren silent. A county sheriff's cruiser, dust-covered and battle-scarred. The deputy who stepped out was young, maybe mid-30s. with the weathered look of someone who patrols vast, empty spaces. His name tag read Mercer. He approached with his hand resting on his holstered weapon, eyes scanning the scene. My rig, the pickup truck with its headlights still burning, the body on the ground, me standing apart from it all. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them," he said, voice steady but tense. I complied, raising my hands shoulder high. "The gun's over there," I said, nodding toward where the revolver lay. "I'm unarmed now." Mercer nodded but maintained his cautious approach. When he reached the body, he knelt briefly, checking for signs of life, though it was clearly a formality. Nobody survives 5 bullet wounds like that. "You Harlan Green?" he asked, standing up again. "Yes, sir." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. "The dispatcher said you called this in yourself, said you were being followed?" I nodded, hand still raised. "For miles. I pulled in here to confront him. He wouldn't stop coming toward me. I warned him multiple times." Mercer studied me for a long moment, then slowly moved his hand away from his weapon. "All right, Mr. Green, you can lower your hands, but don't make any sudden movements. More units are on their way." Over the next hour, the abandoned grain facility transformed into an impromptu command center. 2 more patrol cars arrived, followed by a coroner's van and an unmarked sedan carrying a detective from the county seat. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the night breeze, stretching across the yard in haphazard patterns. I sat in the back of Mercer's cruiser, door open, feet on the ground outside. Not under arrest, they assured me. Just the standard procedure while they sorted things out. I gave my statement 3 times, once to Mercer, once to the detective, a heavy-set man named Kerrigan, and once recorded formally for the report. Each time, I tried to stick to the facts, though they seemed more impossible with each telling. Yes, I'd shot him multiple times. Yes, he had continued walking toward me afterward. No, I couldn't explain how that was possible. "Some people don't go down easy," Kerrigan said, scratching notes in a small pad. "Drugs, adrenaline, human body can withstand a lot more than you'd think." But I could tell he was troubled by the scene. The blood spatter didn't lie. The man had been shot from a distance, had continued walking, and had collapsed more than a minute later, based on the trail he'd left behind. While the coroner worked, Mercer approached me again. "We found ID on the body," he said, consulting his notebook. "Name's Jeffrey Marsh. Mean anything to you?" I shook my head. "Never heard that name before today." "Well, Mr. Marsh has quite a record. Mostly petty stuff 20 years back. Vagrancy, public intoxication, some minor assault charges. Nothing recent, though." Mercer frowned. "Last known address was a halfway house in Oklahoma, but that was 12 years ago. Been off the grid since then." "Why was he following me?" I asked. "Why did he have my name?" Mercer looked up sharply. "What do you mean, he had your name?" I told him about the folded paper I'd found clutched in Marsh's hand. The detective joined us as I explained, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Where's this paper now?" Kerrigan demanded. "I left it where it was. With him." The detective strode back to the body, speaking urgently with the coroner. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language conveyed confusion and concern. Kerrigan returned, holding a small evidence bag containing the unfolded paper. "This your name?" he asked, showing me the bag. I nodded. "That's it. Exactly how I found it." The detective and Mercer exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. "What?" I asked. "What is it?" "The rest of his belongings are pretty standard," Kerrigan said carefully. "Wallet, keys, a few dollars in cash. But we also found a notebook in his truck. It's unusual." "Unusual how?" Another glance between the officers. "It's filled with names," Mercer said finally. "Dozens of them. Some crossed out, some circled, some with dates next to them." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. "My name? Was it in there?" "Yes," Kerrigan admitted. "Circled, no date." "What does that mean?" I asked, but I could tell from their expressions that they didn't know either. The investigation continued through the night. Crime scene technicians arrived, photographing and documenting everything. The coroner's assistants finally removed the body around 3 a.m. I remained at the scene, answering the same questions repeatedly as new officials arrived. By dawn, exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy blanket. The yard looked different in the gray morning light. Smaller, less menacing. The bloodstain on the concrete had turned rust brown, already being scattered by the wind. Detective Kerrigan approached me one final time. "We're going to need you to come to the station to complete your statement," he said. "But based on the evidence and witness accounts, This appears to be a clear case of self-defense. Witness accounts? I asked, confused. There wasn't anyone else here. Kerrigan hesitated. We've had reports about Marsh before. Nothing concrete, just sightings. People being followed on this stretch of highway. Never ended like this, though. So I'm not the first, I said quietly. No, the detective admitted. But you might be the last. They allowed me to drive my own rig to the county sheriff's office, following behind in a patrol car. The morning was fully established by the time we arrived, the small-town station coming to life with the day shift. I gave my formal statement, signed the necessary papers, and surrendered my revolver for ballistics testing. A formality, they assured me, as there was no question about what had happened. They also took photographs of the scrapes on my knuckles, injuries I hadn't even noticed receiving during the confrontation. What about the markings? I asked before leaving. The symbols carved into his skin? Kerrigan's expression darkened. We're looking into that. Preliminary examination suggests they're self-inflicted, some kind of ritual scarification. The coroner thinks they were created over a period of years. And the notebook? The names? That's part of an ongoing investigation, he said firmly. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Green, but that's all I can share at this time. They let me go with instructions not to leave the state until the investigation was complete. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, called my dispatcher to explain the delay in my delivery, and finally collapsed into unconsciousness. I slept through the day and into the evening, waking disoriented as darkness fell once more. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, or why. Then it all came flooding back, the pursuit, the confrontation, the impossible resilience of the man I'd shot. After a shower and a meal at the diner across the street, I returned to find Mercer waiting in the motel parking lot. Hope I didn't alarm you, he said, seeing my expression. Just thought you might want to know. The coroner completed the preliminary autopsy. And? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Cause of death was exactly what you'd expect. Multiple gunshot wounds, Mercer said. But there were other findings. Marsh's body showed signs of severe malnutrition. He probably hadn't eaten properly in weeks, maybe months. And there was evidence of previous injuries that never received medical attention. Broken bones that healed wrong, internal scarring. What are you saying? I'm saying the man should have been barely able to walk, let alone stalk you for miles. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. The coroner can't explain how he was functioning at all in that condition, much less how he continued advancing after taking 5 bullets. I waited, sensing there was more. There's something else, Mercer continued. Those markings on his skin, they're not random. The FBI is sending someone to look at them. But our local expert thinks there's some kind of language or code. What kind of code? I asked. Mercer shrugged. Above my pay grade. But whatever it is, it covered almost every inch of him. Some of the cuts were fresh, made within the last few days. We stood in silence for a moment, the implications hanging in the air between us. Am I in danger? I finally asked. No reason to think so, Mercer said. But he didn't meet my eyes. Marsh seems to have been acting alone, but... He hesitated, then made a decision. Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but that notebook? Most of the names in it belong to people who traveled this highway. Truckers, salesmen, vacationers, some we've been able to contact. They reported similar experiences, being followed, feeling watched. All of them managed to reach populated areas before anything happened. You're the first one who confronted him directly. The names that were crossed out, I said quietly. Did you contact those people too? Mercer's silence was answer enough. Get some rest, Mr. Green, he said finally. You can pick up your rig tomorrow. The investigation is still ongoing, but no one's looking to charge you with anything. Self-defense is clear. After he left, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall. The detective's words replayed in my mind, along with the image of Jeffrey Marsh advancing through a hail of bullets, his expression unchanged, those strange markings covering his skin. Most disturbing of all was the memory of that small folded paper with my name written on it. How had he known who I was? What had made me his target? I didn't sleep again that night. 3 days after the incident at Starling Grain Elevator, I was back on the road. The investigation continued, but the authorities had no reason to keep me. My statement matched the physical evidence. Every law enforcement official I spoke with agreed. I'd acted in self-defense against a disturbed individual who had targeted me for unknown reasons. I delivered my original load, 3 days late, but my company understood the circumstances. Then I took another assignment, this one heading east toward Chicago. I needed to work, Needed the routine and familiarity of the highway stretching before me. But everything had changed. I found myself constantly checking my mirrors, tense at the sight of any vehicle maintaining a consistent distance behind me. I'd never been a nervous driver, but now every pickup truck on the road sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Marsh walking toward me, his body absorbing bullets that should have dropped him instantly. In my dreams, he didn't fall. In my dreams, he reached me. A week after leaving Nebraska, I received a call from Detective Kerrigan. The formal investigation had concluded. No charges would be filed against me. Jeffrey Marsh's body remained unclaimed. No family had come forward. "What about the notebook?" I asked. "The names?" Kerrigan sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "That's still ongoing. The FBI is involved now. I can't share details, but we've confirmed that several of the crossed-out names belong to people who went missing along that stretch of highway over the past decade. Cold cases, mostly. No bodies found." My grip tightened on the phone. "So he was what, a serial killer?" "We don't know," Kerrigan admitted. "The evidence suggests something stranger. Those markings on his body? They match symbols found at some of the disappearance sites, carved into trees, drawn in dirt. And the notebook contains entries that predate Marsh's known presence in the area." "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything officially," the detective replied carefully. "But off the record, whatever was happening out there might have been going on longer than one man's lifetime, and it might not be over." After we hung up, I pulled into a rest stop and sat in my idling truck, trying to process what I'd heard. The implication was clear. Marsh might have been part of something larger, something organized, or perhaps even more disturbing, something passed down, inherited. I reached into my pocket, touching the folded piece of paper I'd been carrying since leaving Nebraska. Not the original with my name, that remained in police evidence, but a similar scrap, on which I'd copied the strange markings I remembered seeing on Marsh's skin. I'd been trying to reproduce them from memory, hoping they might provide some clue to what had happened. So far, they remained meaningless, curved lines and angular shapes that defied categorization. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that they were important, that they contained a message I needed to understand. 2 weeks after the incident, I was in a truck stop in Iowa when I overheard a conversation that froze me in place. Two drivers at the next table, leaning in close, voices hushed but audible. Following him for miles, same distance back, never trying to pass. "Highway 20? The second driver asked. "No, further south. That stretch through Nebraska, the long empty one." I turned in my seat, coffee forgotten. "Excuse me," I said, interrupting their conversation. "This following, when did it happen?" The first driver, a bearded man in his 50s, looked surprised at my intrusion but answered readily enough. "Couple days ago. Friend of mine. Said it was the creepiest thing, this old station wagon, keeping pace behind him for nearly 100 miles. "Did he see the driver?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "Nah." Windows were tinted dark. He pulled off at a rest stop, circled back, managed to lose them eventually. "Where exactly was this?" I pressed. The driver named the same stretch of highway where Marsh had followed me. "Why?" he asked, studying my face. "You had something similar happen?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. That night, I called Detective Kerrigan again. He listened to my account of the trucker's conversation without interruption. "We'll look into it," he said finally. "But I should tell you, Mr. Green, we've had several reports like this since your incident. All of them checked out as ordinary vehicles with innocent explanations." "You think I'm being paranoid," I said flatly. "I think you went through a traumatic experience," Kerrigan replied carefully. "It would be natural to see patterns that might not exist. But I knew what I'd heard. And more importantly, I knew what I'd experienced. Whatever Marsh had been, whoever he had been, it wasn't over." A month passed. I continued working, taking runs across the Midwest, deliberately avoiding Nebraska. The dreams persisted, but their grip loosened slightly with time. I started sleeping better, checking my mirrors less obsessively. Then came the package. It arrived at my home address during a rare weekend off, a small manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a newspaper clipping. The photograph showed Starling grain elevator, taken from the highway at a distance. Nothing remarkable about it, except for the date stamp in the corner, 3 days ago. The newspaper clipping was from a small-town paper I didn't recognize. The headline read, "Local man reports being stalked on highway." The article described an incident virtually identical to mine. A driver followed for miles by a vehicle that maintained a consistent distance. When the driver confronted his pursuer at an abandoned gas station, the follower fled. The final line of the article sent ice through my veins. The driver was unable to identify the make of the vehicle, describing it only as an old pickup truck, possibly blue. I called Kerrigan immediately. He promised to send someone to collect the package, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. It could be someone who read about your case, playing a sick joke, he suggested. Or it could be happening again, I countered. That night, I spread my notes across my kitchen table, everything I'd gathered about Marsh and the incident. Newspaper articles, my own written account, the copied symbols. Looking at it all together, I began to see connections I'd missed before. The symbols I'd copied formed a pattern when arranged in a certain order. Not a language exactly, but a diagram of sorts, and at its center was a shape that matched the outline of Starling Grain Elevator perfectly. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marsh hadn't chosen that location randomly. He'd driven me there deliberately. The elevator wasn't just an abandoned building. It was significant somehow, important to whatever purpose had driven him to follow me. I booked a week's vacation from work and packed my personal vehicle. The next morning I headed west, back toward Nebraska, back toward the grain elevator. I told myself I was being foolish, chasing shadows, but I needed answers, needed to understand what had happened to me and why. The journey took 2 days. I avoided the highway where it had all begun, taking a parallel route instead. As I neared the county where the elevator stood, I called ahead to the sheriff's office, asking for Deputy Mercer. "I'm surprised to hear from you, Mr. Green," he said when I explained my presence in the area. Most people would be putting as much distance as possible between themselves and a place like that. "I need to understand what happened," I told him simply. Mercer agreed to meet me at a diner in the county seat. He looked more worn than I remembered, with new lines etched around his eyes. "The FBI investigation hit a wall," he told me over coffee. Marsh's background is spotty at best. Spent time in various institutions in his youth, then disappeared from official records for long stretches. Would surface occasionally, minor offenses, psychiatric holds, then vanish again. "And the notebook?" I asked. "The names?" "They've identified most of them. 17 people who went missing over the past 30 years, all along that same stretch of highway. No bodies ever recovered." Mercer sipped his coffee. "But here's the strange part. The notebook also contained names of people who disappeared before Marsh was even born. How is that possible?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Mercer set down his cup. "The prevailing theory is that Marsh inherited the notebook, continued whatever sick project someone else started." "The markings on his body," I said. "Did they ever figure out what they meant?" "Not exactly." Mercer hesitated. "But they found similar markings at Starling Grain Elevator, hidden, carved into the concrete foundations. Carbon dating puts them at about 70 years old, when the elevator was first built." I told him my theory, that the elevator wasn't randomly chosen, that it held some significance to Marsh, or to whatever drove him. Mercer didn't dismiss the idea. "Place has a history," he admitted. "Bad accidents during construction, workers disappearing. Locals always said it was built wrong, built on the wrong spot." "I need to see it again," I said. Mercer studied me for a long moment. "I can't officially sanction this, you understand. But I can look the other way if you decide to visit. The property's abandoned, technically public land now." The next day, I drove to Starling Grain Elevator. The facility looked different in daylight, less menacing, more pathetic. A concrete dinosaur slowly crumbling back into the earth. The yard where the confrontation had occurred was empty, the bloodstain long since washed away by rain. Yellow crime scene tape still fluttered from one corner, forgotten or deliberately left behind. I walked the perimeter of the complex, studying the buildings, comparing them to the diagram formed by the symbols I'd copied. The match wasn't perfect, but close enough to confirm my suspicion. The arrangement of structures followed the pattern of those carved markings. The main silo loomed above me, a concrete cylinder reaching toward the sky. Its entrance was padlocked, but the hasp was rusted, the wood around it rotted. A firm pull tore it free. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through broken windows high above. The space was vast and hollow, sound echoing strangely. Graffiti covered the lower walls, names, dates, crude drawings. But higher up, above the reach of casual vandals, I could see older markings, carved directly into the concrete, weathered by time but still visible. The same symbols I'd seen on Marsh's body, the same pattern I'd been trying to decipher for weeks. I spent hours in that place, documenting everything with my phone's camera, copying down markings, measuring distances between structures. By the time the sun began to set, I had filled a notebook with observations and sketches. As I prepared to leave, a movement caught my eye, a flicker at the edge of the property, near the access road. I froze, peering through the gathering dusk. A vehicle was parked there, half hidden by the tall grass. Not Marsh's pickup. This was newer, a dark SUV with tinted windows. As I watched, it backed slowly away, then turned and drove off toward the highway. I considered pursuing it, but something held me back. Instead, I completed my documentation, locked my discoveries in my car's trunk, and headed back to town. That night in my motel room, I spread everything out again, adding my new findings to the existing materials. The pattern was clearer now, the connections more obvious. Starling Grain Elevator wasn't just a building, it was a marker of sorts, a monument with its own internal logic. The symbols formed a calendar, I realized, not one based on days or months, but on cycles of some other kind. And according to that calendar, we were approaching another significant point, less than a week away. I called Mercer the next morning, sharing my discoveries. He listened without interruption, then asked to meet me at the sheriff's office. When I arrived, Detective Kerrigan was there as well, along with a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Special Agent Wilcox from the FBI. I laid out my findings for them, explaining the pattern I'd discovered and its implications. "You believe someone else has taken up Marsh's activities," Agent Wilcox said. It wasn't a question. "The reports of vehicles following drivers have continued," I pointed out, "and now there's a specific date approaching, according to the calendar these symbols create. 3 days from now," Mercer added, studying the diagram I'd created. "What exactly do you think is going to happen?" Kerrigan asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but whatever Marsh was part of, whatever drove him to follow me and those others, it's still active, and it's centered on that elevator." They didn't dismiss me outright, which told me more than any words could have. They knew something, or suspected something that aligned with my theories. "We'll increase patrols on that stretch of highway," Mercer said finally. "Keep an eye on the elevator. But Mr. Green, I strongly advise you to leave the area before this date you've identified." I nodded, agreed to their advice, thanked them for their time. But even as I spoke, I knew I wouldn't be leaving. Not yet. Not until I understood what had happened to me, and why. The next 2 days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I reviewed everything I'd gathered, looking for patterns I might have missed. I drove the highway where Marsh had followed me, trying to see it through his eyes, to understand what had made me a target. And I watched for followers, that dark SUV I'd glimpsed at the elevator, or any vehicle that maintained a too perfect distance behind me. But nothing appeared. The roads remained ordinary, the traffic unremarkable. On the night before the date indicated by the symbols, I returned to Starling Grain Elevator. I parked some distance away, hiking in through the fields to avoid detection. The moon was nearly full, casting the abandoned complex in silver light and deep shadow. I found a position in one of the outbuildings with a clear view of the main yard, the same spot where Marsh had confronted me. Then I settled in to wait, camera ready, notebook open. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. No vehicles approached. No figures moved in the moonlight. The elevator stood silent and empty, just a relic of a bygone agricultural era. I was beginning to think I'd misinterpreted everything when I heard it. The distant sound of an engine, growing steadily louder. Headlights appeared on the access road, sweeping across the overgrown fields as a vehicle approached. Not one vehicle, 3. They entered the yard in formation, a dark SUV in the lead, followed by 2 pickup trucks. They parked in a semicircle, headlights illuminating the central area where Marsh had fallen. Figures emerged from the vehicles, 6 in total, all dressed in dark clothing. They moved with purpose, carrying objects I couldn't identify at first. As they arranged themselves in the yard, I realized they were setting up some kind of ceremony. A folding table was placed at the center. Candles were lit, their flames steady in the still night air. One of the figures, taller than the rest, thin to the point of gauntness, began unrolling something on the table. A map, I thought at first, but then recognized it as a large sheet covered in the same symbols I'd been studying. I raised my camera, zooming in as much as possible, capturing images of the proceedings. The group had formed a circle around the table now. The tall figure raised his arms, and the others followed suit. Though I couldn't hear their words clearly, I could see their lips moving in unison, a chant or prayer of some kind. The ceremony continued for nearly an hour, intricate and choreographed, with each participant taking turns approaching the table and adding something to it. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The tall figure gathered the sheet, carefully folding it along precise lines. The candles were extinguished, the table collapsed and returned to one of the vehicles. Before departing, each person knelt briefly at the exact spot where Marsh had died, touching the ground with their fingertips. Then they returned to their vehicles and drove away, headlights fading into the distance. I remained hidden for another hour, making sure they were truly gone before emerging. When I finally approached the spot where their ceremony had taken place, I found only one item left behind, a small folded paper, identical to the one Marsh had carried. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. Inside was a name, written in the same spidery handwriting I remembered. Not my name this time. A different one, unfamiliar to me. The next target. I gathered my evidence and left the elevator for the last time, driving straight to the sheriff's office. Though it was nearly dawn, I called Mercer's cell phone from the parking lot. He arrived 20 minutes later, bleary-eyed but alert. I showed him the photographs I'd taken, described the ceremony I'd witnessed, and gave him the folded paper with its ominous name. He recognized it immediately, a long-haul trucker who regularly used the highway, scheduled to pass through in 2 days' time. "We'll intercept him, warn him," Mercer said, already reaching for his phone. "And these people you saw, we can identify their vehicles, track them down." "I don't think it's that simple," I said quietly. "Marsh was just one part of this. These people, whoever they are, they've been doing this for generations, and they'll keep doing it, with or without those specific vehicles, those specific individuals." Mercer didn't argue. We both knew I was right. In the following weeks, a task force was formed. Local law enforcement working with the FBI, focusing on the highway and the grain elevator. They monitored traffic patterns, investigated the ownership history of the property, tracked down former workers who had been there when the elevator was operational. I provided everything I had gathered, every observation and theory. Then I went home, back to my life, back to my roots, though I made sure they never took me anywhere near that stretch of Nebraska again. Sometimes I wonder if we've stopped it, if the investigation disrupted whatever cycle had been in operation for all those decades. Other times, I'm certain it continues, just moved to a different location, adapted to avoid detection. I still keep my notes, still update them when new information emerges, still check the missing persons reports from the Midwest, looking for patterns others might miss. And I never drive at night without checking my mirrors, watching for vehicles that maintain that perfect, unvarying distance. Because out there on the long highways that stretch across America's empty spaces, something is hunting, something that knows your name before you ever see it coming, something patient enough to follow you for miles, for hours, until you make that fatal mistake of stopping in the wrong place, confronting what should not be confronted. I survived my encounter. Others weren't so fortunate. And somewhere, on some isolated stretch of asphalt, the pursuit continues. So if you're driving alone at night, and you notice a vehicle behind you, not too close, not too far, just there, steady and constant for mile after empty mile, don't stop, don't confront it, just keep driving until you reach lights and people and safety. Because some things, once they start following you, never really stop. I'll never forget that first winter in Denali, 3 months into my new job as a backcountry ranger at Alaska's most remote outpost, and already questioning every life decision that led me here. The name's Koyani, it means one who walks far in Dena'ina. My grandmother gave me that name, though I never felt worthy of it until I took this post. The Toklat Ranger Station sits 92 miles into the park, accessible only by bush plane during winter. My cabin perches on a small rise overlooking Primrose Lake, a crystal blue expanse that freezes solid by November. When the clouds part, Denali herself looms on the horizon, indifferent to the tiny humans who dare trespass on her domain. I came here running from something, don't we all? After 10 years in Seattle emergency services, I'd seen enough broken bodies and shattered lives. The final straw came when we responded to a bus crash. 23 dead, including a family of 4 I'd pulled from the wreckage. The youngest, just 3 years old, died in my arms while I whispered useless comfort. 2 weeks later, I applied for the most isolated ranger position in the National Park Service. You understand what isolation means at Toklat, right? My supervisor, Monroe, had asked during the interview. 6 months without seeing another human during winter rotation, radio contact only. Nearest help is 4 hours by air, weather permitting, which it often doesn't. That was precisely what I wanted. Silence, solitude, space to stitch my fraying sanity back together. The first 2 months passed in blissful monotony. Daily temperature recordings, wildlife observations, equipment maintenance. I found peace in the routine, and the absolute quiet broken only by wind through spruce needles and occasional wolf howls across the valley, until the tracks appeared. I noticed them my third month, returning from checking the western boundary. Massive impressions in the snow leading directly to my cabin. At first I assumed moose. We get monsters up here, shoulders higher than a tall man's head. But something felt wrong. The stride length exceeded anything I'd documented, nearly 6 feet between prints. And the shape, not quite human, not quite bear. I radioed Monroe that evening during our weekly check-in. "Probably just a large grizzly passing through," he said. "They don't fully hibernate up there. Some wake periodically, especially males." In February, with 3 feet of snow? And these tracks weren't ambling like a bear. They were purposeful. "Take photographs next time. Document everything." Monroe's voice crackled through static. "And Kuyani, remember protocol if it is a bear. No heroes." That night, I woke to a sound I still struggled to describe. Somewhere between a deep, resonant wood knock and guttural vocalization that echoed across the frozen lake. I bolted upright, grabbing my headlamp and service pistol. The thermometer outside my window read -28. No animal should be active in that cold. I swept my beam across the cabin's single-room kitchen area, desk with weather equipment, narrow bed, finding nothing disturbed. The knocking came again, 3 distinct impacts that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's logs. I moved to the window, breath clouding the glass. Moonlight transformed the landscape into monochrome silver. Primrose Lake stretched vast and empty, bordered by black spruce sentinels. Nothing moved, yet I couldn't escape the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Standing motionless at the window, I gradually became aware of something at the forest edge. Not movement exactly, but a wrongness in the tree line, a deeper patch of shadow where shadows shouldn't gather. As my eyes adjusted, the shadow resolved into a massive silhouette, impossibly tall and broad, standing upright among the trees. I blinked, and it vanished. Sleep became impossible. I stoked the wood stove and reviewed the Denali Wildlife Manual, finding nothing that matched what I'd glimpsed. Around dawn, exhaustion finally claimed me. I woke to brilliant sunlight and fresh resolve. The logical explanation: exhaustion combined with isolation was playing tricks on my perception. I'd been in Alaska long enough to know the wilderness manufactures fear from mundane sources. I'd document the tracks properly, set up trail cameras, gather evidence like the scientist I was trained to be. Outside, fresh snow had erased yesterday's tracks. I trudged through knee-deep powder to check the perimeter. Nothing seemed disturbed until I reached the woodpile behind the cabin. The massive logs I'd carefully stacked were scattered across the clearing, not knocked over as a bear might do foraging for insects, but deliberately unstacked and arranged in a rough semicircle. At the center lay the partially consumed carcass of a wolf, ribs splayed open, internal organs missing. No scavenger I knew would kill a healthy wolf, much less display it this way. I photographed everything, my hands trembling slightly. Despite the brutal cold, sweat trickled down my spine as I collected samples from the carcass. That evening, the radio crackled with an emergency transmission from Monroe. "Koyani, we've got hikers missing near your sector. 2 males, experienced outdoorsmen. Their emergency beacon activated 48 hours ago near Refuge Valley, then went silent. Weather's closing in. Can't get aircraft out until it clears. You're the closest personnel. Can you investigate at first light?" I stared at the radio. Refuge Valley lay 15 miles northeast, a grueling trek through rugged terrain even in good conditions, with 3 feet of snow and temperatures plummeting below -30 at night. "Those men will die waiting for weather to clear," Monroe added grimly. "I'll head out at first light," I confirmed, already calculating supplies needed for emergency rescue. "Koyani," Monroe hesitated. "There's something else. This is the 3rd group that's gone missing in that region this winter. Previous 2 were never found." I glanced at the window, darkness gathering outside. Something moved at the forest edge, a massive shadow detaching from deeper shadows. I killed my cabin lights and watched as it traversed the clearing with an unnatural, fluid grace that belied its enormous size. "I'll find them," I promised Monroe, wondering if I was lying to us both. The radio went silent. Outside, the thing that was neither bear nor man paused at the center of the clearing, raised its head as if sensing my gaze, and melted back into the wilderness. Dawn arrived with bitter clarity, the thermometer reading 37 below. I layered methodically, moisture-wicking base, insulating mid-layers, windproof shell, knowing a mistake in these temperatures meant death. Into my pack went emergency supplies, medical kit, shelter materials, extra food, satellite phone despite its unreliability in these mountains, and signaling equipment. My service rifle felt reassuring against my shoulder. For bears, I told myself, ignoring the memory of that silhouette's distinctly unassigned proportions. The trek to Refuge Valley demanded everything I had. Deep snow covered a landscape designed to kill the unprepared. I followed frozen creek beds where possible, snowshoed across meadows, and carefully navigated windswept passes where one misstep meant a 1,000-foot fall. By late afternoon, I reached the coordinates Monroe had provided. A stand of ancient spruce sheltered a small clearing where the missing hikers had apparently made camp. Or someone had. The site was unmistakable. Tent poles bent at unnatural angles protruded from drifted snow. Shredded fabric flapped in the wind. Personal items scattered across 30 yards told a story of violence. "Ben? Marcus?" I called, knowing no one would answer. I photographed everything, moving systematically through the site. The destruction suggested explosive force. The tent hadn't merely collapsed, but appeared blown outward from within. Methodically, I marked items: a torn backpack, cooking equipment, a cracked satellite phone. Blood speckled the snow in places, frozen burgundy against pristine white. Most disturbing was what appeared to be a shelter constructed from broken branches and torn equipment. Not the work of experienced hikers, but something crude and instinctual, a terrible parody of human construction techniques. As dusk approached, I knew I couldn't return to my cabin before dark. I established camp a quarter-mile away, wanting distance from that violated space. Following protocol, I built a small, contained fire, though every instinct screamed that announcing my presence was dangerous. That night brought sounds no Alaska veteran could explain: wood knocks echoing through valleys where no human walked, followed by low, modulated howls unlike any wolf or windstorm. They seemed to come from multiple directions, as if several creatures called to each other across miles of wilderness. I huddled in my tent, service rifle across my lap, and tried to convince myself the missing hikers had simply wandered off after a bear destroyed their camp. Morning came with heavy cloud cover threatening snow. I forced down freeze-dried breakfast and broke camp efficiently. Following what might have been a trail of disturbed snow, I pushed deeper into Refuge Valley. 3 hours later, I found the first body. He lay half buried in snow beneath a rocky overhang, his climbing harness still attached. The official report would later identify him as Benjamin Schaefer, 32, from Oregon, but reports wouldn't capture the rictus of pure terror frozen on his face, nor the bizarre pattern of injuries. His chest had been crushed by what appeared to be massive hands, with distinct finger impressions visible in the bruising. More disturbing were the bite marks, not from any recognized predator, the teeth pattern almost human but larger, more powerful. I documented everything with mechanical precision, my ranger training overriding horror. Cold equations of survival dictated I couldn't carry his body out. I marked the GPS coordinates and covered him with stones where possible, a gesture toward dignity in this merciless place. Of the second hiker, Marcus Foster, I found only scattered equipment and a boot containing partial remains. As I prepared to return to my cabin with this grim evidence, heavy snow began falling. Within minutes, visibility dropped to mere yards. I consulted my map, calculated bearings, and began the long journey home, with weather deteriorating rapidly. 2 miles in, I realized I was being stalked. Nothing obvious, no footsteps behind me or dark shape on my periphery. But 20 years in wilderness teaches you to recognize the weight of observation. The forest had gone silent in a way that indicated large predator presence. I quickened my pace, abandoning stealth for speed. Crossing a frozen stream, I spotted them, tracks emerging from the tree line, following my path. The impressions dwarfed my snowshoe prints, easily 18 inches long with 5 distinct toe depressions, no mistaking them for bear now. These were bipedal tracks, made by something that walked upright. The snow intensified, becoming a white wall that disoriented and blinded. Navigation became impossible. Consulting my GPS, I realized I'd veered off course toward unfamiliar territory. With darkness approaching and temperatures plummeting, I needed shelter immediately. Providence appeared in the form of an old trapper's cabin half buried in snow. These structures dot Alaska's backcountry, emergency refuges maintained by rangers and locals. This one hadn't seen maintenance in years, roof partially collapsed, door hanging by one hinge, but it represented survival. I cleared the entrance and slipped inside, securing the broken door with rope from my pack. The single room contained a rusted wood stove, broken table, and crude bunk covered with moldering blankets. Better than freezing to death in the storm. It took precious minutes to get a fire started with damp wood. As warmth gradually returned to my extremities, I assessed my situation. The storm had become a full blizzard, howling around the cabin's fragile walls. Radio contact would be impossible. I was effectively cut off until conditions improved. Night descended with unnatural swiftness. I arranged emergency lighting, prepared minimal rations, and tried to establish communication with headquarters. Nothing but static answered. The knocking began shortly after midnight. 3 distinct impacts against the cabin's west wall. Pause. 3 more. My hand moved to my rifle as I extinguished my light, allowing night vision to develop. Something massive moved outside, its shadow momentarily blocking the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the boarded window. The door handle rattled, not randomly, but with deliberate manipulation, testing the strength of my hasty barricade. I steadied my breathing, aiming at the door. If it came through, I'd have seconds to react. The pressure on the door ceased. Silence descended, broken only by wind. Just as my muscles began relaxing, an inhuman scream tore through the night. Rage and hunger distilled into sound. The cabin's wall shuddered under massive impact. Wooden boards cracked but held. I fired a warning shot through the damaged wall, hoping to drive the creature back. The response was immediate, not retreat but escalation. Both windows shattered inward as the assault intensified. Through gaps in the broken boards, I glimpsed massive limbs covered in dark hair, hands large enough to engulf a human skull. My next shot wasn't a warning. The hollow point round struck something solid. A roar of pain echoed across the valley, followed by heavy footsteps retreating into forest. For hours I maintained vigilance, expecting the creature's return. Instead, a new sound emerged from the darkness. Voices, human voices, murmuring just beyond comprehension. They seemed to come from all directions, calling in sing-song tones. Hallucinations from stress and cold, I told myself, knowing the nearest humans were days away. Yet the voices persisted until dawn, keeping me balanced on a knife edge of alertness and exhaustion. Morning brought clearing skies and an unsettling discovery. The snow around the cabin bore evidence of not one creature but several, at least 3 distinct track patterns of varying sizes, all showing the same impossible foot structure. They had surrounded the cabin completely, approaching from different directions in what could only be described as coordinated movement. Most disturbing was what they left behind. 20 yards from the cabin stood a crude arrangement of broken trees, 3 trunks driven into snow, forming a triangular structure. Hanging from this construction was my missing backpack, the one I'd photographed at the destroyed campsite. I hadn't brought it with me. Something had. The message seemed unmistakable. "We know who you are. We've been watching you all along." The journey back to my ranger station took twice the expected time. I maintained constant vigilance, stopping frequently to scan surroundings and check for pursuit. Though I saw nothing, the sensation of being observed never faded. Radio contact remained impossible until I crested the final ridge overlooking Primrose Lake. Monroe's voice, fragmented by static, conveyed both relief and concern. "Worried when you missed check-in? Storm system. Search team ready." "I found 1 body," I reported mechanically. "Sending coordinates. Second hiker presumed dead. Evidence suggests predator attack." A long pause followed. "What kind of predator?" Monroe finally asked. I stared across the pristine wilderness stretching to the horizon, beautiful and merciless. The tracks converging on the trapper's cabin. The calculated assault. The suspended backpack. "Unknown," I answered, "but intelligent." My cabin appeared undisturbed when I finally reached it. Though that meant little. These creatures, whatever they were, understood doors and windows. They could manipulate objects. The line between animal and something else had blurred beyond recognition. Inside, I barricaded the entrance, covered windows, and collapsed into exhausted sleep that brought no rest. Only fragmented nightmares of massive shapes moving through trees, of being watched by eyes too intelligent for comfort. I woke to radio static. Monroe's voice cut through, uncharacteristically urgent. "Kuyani? Need confirmation on your report. You said unknown predator, but described injuries consistent with bear attack. Regional office wants clarification before sending recovery team." The subtext was clear. Writing unknown bipedal creatures with near-human intelligence on an official report would end my career. 20 years in wilderness management had taught me the politics of predator encounters, particularly when they didn't fit established categories. Presumed large male grizzly, I amended, the lie bitter on my tongue. Unusual behavior possibly indicating territorial dispute or food scarcity. Monroe's relief was palpable. "Recovery team launches tomorrow if weather holds. They'll extract the body and investigate the site." After signing off, I examined the photographs I'd taken, the destroyed camp, Benjamin Schaefer's crushed body, those massive tracks in the snow. Nothing in my extensive wilderness training explained what I'd encountered. I approached my personal laptop with reluctance. Internet connectivity at Toklat came through a painfully slow satellite uplink, reserved for emergencies and official communications. This qualified as both. Searching bipedal creatures Alaska wilderness produced the expected results. Bigfoot forums, cryptozoology websites, blurry photographs dismissed by science. I'd always considered these tales logger folklore, campfire stories to frighten novices. Now I examined them with disturbing new perspective. Native accounts proved more compelling. Denali itself, originally called Denadi, featured prominently in indigenous stories about those who walk like men but are not men. The Koyukon people spoke of territories where hunters never returned, of creatures that mimicked human voices to lure travelers astray. Most unsettling were accounts from other rangers and wilderness professionals, not public records, but stories shared privately among those who spent lifetimes in remote backcountry. Destroyed camps, strange tracks, coordinated stalking behavior from creatures that remained just beyond definitive documentation. My reading was interrupted by 3 distinct knocks on the cabin wall. I extinguished lights immediately, retrieving my rifle with practiced motion. Against regulations, I'd loaded hollow point rounds after returning from Refuge Valley. Ammunition designed to stop, not merely wound. Through window cracks, moonlight revealed the clearing empty. Yet the knocking continued. 3 impacts, pause, 3 more. Not random animal investigation, but deliberate communication. It moved systematically around the cabin's perimeter, testing different locations. I maintained absolute stillness, controlling my breathing. The temperature in the cabin had dropped precipitously, my exhaled breaths forming visible clouds. Outside, something scraped against logs, the sound of massive claws or hands moving slowly across wood. The radio crackled unexpectedly, Monroe's voice filling the silence. Kuyani? Emergency weather alert. Major system moving in. Recovery team delayed minimum 72 hours. Acknowledge? Before I could respond, a tremendous impact struck the roof, as if something massive had landed above me. Dust and debris shook loose from ceiling beams. The radio died mid-transmission. What followed was psychological warfare. For hours, the creatures circled my cabin, occasionally testing doors and windows but never committing to full assault. They seemed to communicate through those distinctive knocks, answering each other across distances. Twice, I heard what sounded disturbingly like my own voice repeating words I'd spoken into the radio earlier. Perfect mimicry deployed as lure. Dawn brought momentary respite. The storm Monroe predicted arrived with blinding intensity, visibility reduced to yards. Through swirling snow, I glimpsed dark shapes retreating into forest, 3 distinct figures moving with that same unsettling fluidity. The blizzard might delay the recovery team, but it also confined my visitors to shelter. I seized the opportunity to reinforce my cabin, boarding broken windows, constructing defensive positions, inventorying potential weapons beyond my limited ammunition. During this work, I discovered something lodged between wall logs near the window, a tuft of dark hair unlike anything in my considerable experience with North American wildlife. Coarser than bear fur, longer than moose or wolf, with a structure that appeared almost human but distinctly not. I sealed it in a sample bag, photographed it beside measurement tools, and added it to growing evidence. The storm raged 3 days, during which the creatures remained absent. I used the time to transcribe detailed accounts of every encounter, preparing the documentation I couldn't include in official reports. If something happened to me, someone might find this record. On the 4th day, as weather cleared, the radio returned to life. Repeat. Recovery team inbound to your coordinates. ETA 3 hours. Prepare landing zone if possible. Acknowledge? I confirmed, relief washing through me. Human contact after weeks of isolation and terror. Evidence that could corroborate my experiences. Perhaps an end to this nightmare. Those hours passed with excruciating slowness. I cleared snow from the helicopter landing area, assembled equipment for the recovery team, and prepared my unofficial documentation. The sample of hair went into my pocket, physical evidence beyond photographs and testimony. 2 hours into this preparation, I heard the knocks again. 3 distinct impacts from the forest edge. They had returned. Through binoculars I spotted them, not hiding now, but standing openly at tree line. 3 figures of varying height, the largest easily 8 feet tall. Dark hair covered massive frames built for wilderness survival. Most disturbing were their faces, not quite human, not quite animal, but somewhere in evolutionary territory science hadn't categorized. They made no move toward the cabin, content to observe from distance, showing themselves deliberately after days of stealth. The message seemed clear. We could have taken you at any time. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors scattered them instantly. One moment standing in plain sight, The next vanished into dense forest with impossible speed for creatures their size. The recovery team consisted of 4 rangers and a wildlife biologist named Abernathy. Their arrival transformed my isolated outpost into controlled chaos. Equipment unloaded, communications established, questions fired rapidly about the missing hikers. I provided official coordinates and my amended report about presumed bear activity. Privately, I took Abernathy aside, showing her the hair sample and unaltered photographs. She examined everything with scientific detachment, then fixed me with an unreadable gaze. This follows a pattern. 3 incidents this year in different sectors, all with similar characteristics. You've seen these before? Hope flared that I wasn't alone in my observations. I've seen evidence consistently eliminated from official records, she responded carefully. Tracks documented then attributed to unidentified large mammals. Hair samples collected then lost during transport. The Park Service has policy regarding unconventional wildlife encounters. You mean cover-ups? I mean protecting careers and funding, she corrected. Nobody advances by filing reports about creatures science doesn't acknowledge. The recovery team departed that afternoon for Refuge Valley, promising to return within 48 hours. Abernathy took my hair sample for analysis, though her expression suggested limited optimism about its official journey through bureaucratic channels. Alone again, I faced the reality of my situation. The creatures had revealed themselves deliberately. They understood helicopters meant humans. Most disturbing, they'd shown capacity for strategic thinking, for patience. That night, I dreamed of dark shapes moving through trees, of massive hands reaching through broken windows. I woke gasping to the now familiar sound of knocking. 3 impacts, pause, 3 more. Outside, the moon illuminated 3 dark silhouettes, standing at the forest edge, watching my cabin. Watching me. Not hiding anymore, letting me know with certainty. This was their territory. I was the intruder, and they wanted me gone. The recovery team's return brought grim confirmation. They'd located Benjamin Schaefer's body where I'd left it, along with scattered remains of his companion. Their official report echoed my amended version, consistent with large ursine predator attack. Science and bureaucracy combining to erase the inexplicable. What they found at the trapper's cabin confirmed my private fears. The structure had been systematically destroyed, not random animal damage, but deliberate deconstruction. Logs pulled apart, door removed intact and carried away. Everything I'd touched disassembled with methodical purpose. We've documented similar destruction at abandoned structures throughout the region, Abernathy admitted privately before their departure. Always following human visitation. Always methodical, rather than typical predator behavior. She pressed a satellite phone into my hand, more powerful than standard ranger equipment. Official channels are monitored. This connects directly to my research team. If they return, document everything. The helicopter's departure left vacuum silence. Within hours, familiar knocking resumed, no longer testing but announcing presence. 3 impacts against different walls, strategically timed. Communication or intimidation, the message was identical. We remained. That night brought escalation. I woke to the sound of heavy objects being dragged across my cabin roof. Through reinforced windows, I glimpsed massive shapes moving with deliberate purpose. They were constructing something. Morning revealed their work. Broken branches and stripped logs arranged in complex patterns surrounding my cabin. The formations mimicked human construction techniques but served no obvious functional purpose. Territorial marking, perhaps, or demonstration of intelligence. Most disturbing was the precision. Perfectly symmetrical arrangements no random animal could produce. I photographed everything, transmitting images through Abernathy's secure channel. Her response came hours later. Documented similar structures near other ranger outposts where encounters reported, consistent with territorial display behavior. Subject matter experts suggest non-engagement. Repeat, do not engage. That afternoon they crossed another threshold. I spotted the largest creature standing openly in the clearing, motionless, staring directly at my cabin. Not hiding, not threatening, watching with unnerving patience. When I raised binoculars, it tilted its head. A disconcertingly human gesture of curiosity. Hours passed in this silent standoff. I documented continuously, cataloging physical characteristics now clearly visible. The massive frame covered in dark hair, the unsettling hybridization of ape-like features with distinctly human elements, proportions both familiar and impossible. Most striking were its eyes, not animal eyes, but containing undeniable intelligence. When it finally retreated at dusk, its movement conveyed not fear but purpose concluded. That night, radio contact with headquarters failed completely. Attempts through regular channels produced only static. Abernathy's satellite phone remained functional but couldn't connect to routine park frequencies. Whether from storm interference or more troubling causes, I was effectively isolated. The knocking changed pattern. 5 impacts now, rhythmic, repeated hourly throughout the night. Sleep became impossible as tensions escalated toward some inevitable confrontation. Dawn brought discovery that they'd constructed a perimeter of broken trees completely surrounding my cabin. Each post stood 8 feet tall, stripped of branches, driven deep into frozen ground. The formation created unmistakable boundary, not to keep me in, but to mark territory now under dispute. I'd recognized escalating patterns in predator behavior throughout my career. This displayed textbook conflict progression, observation, territorial marking, intimidation displays, and finally, confrontation. We were approaching that final phase. Abernathy's team responded to my transmitted images with unprecedented urgency. Extraction team mobilizing. Weather window projected in 36 hours. Maintain shelter position until arrival. Those 36 hours stretched human endurance to breaking points. The creatures abandoned stealth entirely, moving openly around the clearing day and night. Their vocalizations evolved from knocks to complex modulated calls exchanged across distances, language by any reasonable definition. Through cabin windows, I watched them systematically dismantle my weather monitoring equipment, examining components with disturbing curiosity. They carried pieces into forest, returning hours later without them, learning, analyzing, understanding human technology. On the second night, they tested defenses in earnest, not attacking directly, but applying strategic pressure to different entry points, windows, doors, the roof access hatch, probing for structural weaknesses with methodical patience. I maintained defensive positions, rotating between reinforced windows, conserving ammunition for genuine breach attempts. The psychological toll mounted as hours passed in hypervigilant exhaustion. Near dawn, their tactics shifted dramatically. The knocking stopped. Vocalizations ceased. The clearing fell deadly silent. Through night vision equipment, I observed them retreating systematically into forest, a coordinated withdrawal unlike anything in documented predator behavior. The silence persisted until mid-morning, when a new sound emerged, rhythmic chopping from the ridge overlooking my position. Through binoculars, I spotted the largest creature systematically felling trees, creating what appeared to be a barricade across the only viable helicopter landing zone within miles. They understood extraction was coming. They were actively preventing it. I transmitted urgent updates through Abernathy's channel. Her response chilled me. Behavior consistent with advanced problem-solving capabilities. Subjects demonstrating strategic thinking, not reactive instinct. Extraction team rerouting to secondary LZ. Extend timeline plus 24 hours. Another day in psychological siege. I rationed remaining food and water, calculating survival equations against dwindling supplies. The creatures maintained distance but constant presence, always visible, always watching, a pressure more effective than direct assault. That evening, weather shifted dramatically. Temperature dropped 30 degrees as Arctic air descended from northern mountains. The cabin's aging wood stove struggled against deepening cold. My breath formed clouds inside as hours passed. At midnight, 3 distinct knocks rattled the door, not walls this time, but directly against the reinforced entrance. A new communication, a new phase. I raised my rifle, aiming at the center of the door, finger resting near the trigger guard. Through the window adjacent to the entrance, I glimpsed movement, the largest creature positioning itself deliberately in my line of sight. In its massive hands, it held my axe, the tool I'd left outside before departing for Refuge Valley weeks earlier. Our eyes met across the distance. Recognition flowed between species that should never have developed mutual understanding. It raised the axe deliberately, then placed it gently against the cabin wall, not threatening, but demonstrating it could have been used as weapon and wasn't. Communication. Deliberate, unmistakable communication. It retreated several paces, then performed something I still struggle to rationalize. It pushed snow into a deliberate pattern before my door. Not random clearing, but shapes with clear intentionality. When finished, it backed away, watching expectantly. Through the window, I examined its creation. Crude symbols pressed into snow. 3 vertical lines with horizontal connectors. Primitive but unmistakable representation of human stick figures. Beside them, larger figures with distinct characteristics matching the creatures themselves. Between these groupings, a vertical line, boundary, separation, division of territory. The message required no cryptographer. This place is ours. Stay on your side. I remained motionless, processing implications beyond scientific paradigms. The creature watched, waiting for response or acknowledgement. When none came, It repeated the knocking pattern against my door, more insistent now. What do you acknowledge when facing something science claims doesn't exist? What diplomatic protocols apply to creatures occupying evolutionary space between recognized categories? I made my decision based not on ranger training but human instinct. I knocked back 3 distinct impacts against the inside wall. The effect was immediate. The creature tilted its head, then repeated the pattern with subtle variation. I matched it precisely. For 10 minutes this exchange continued. Patterns growing progressively complex, a primitive language developing between species. Communication established, it backed away, rejoining 2 smaller figures at forest edge. Together they melted into darkness, leaving only their message scraped in snow. The extraction team arrived at dawn, descending by cable from helicopter hovering above blocked landing zone. 4 armed rangers equipped for wilderness extraction secured the perimeter while Abernathy debriefed me with clinical precision. The structures, the communication attempts, all documented before, she confirmed, examining my photographs. But direct interactive communication, that's unprecedented escalation. They're intelligent, I stated flatly. Not animal intelligence. Something else entirely. The official record will show weather damage and unusual bear activity, she replied with practiced neutrality. Your replacement arrives next rotation. You're being reassigned to headquarters, administrative position. Translation. Removal from field service. Too much witnessed, too much documented, too dangerous to bureaucracy and established science. As equipment was packed and preparations made for departure, I surveyed the wilderness that had transformed from sanctuary to confrontation zone. The pristine expanse of Primrose Lake, the cabin that had sheltered me through months of isolation, the forest edge where they had stood openly, watching with eyes too aware for comfort. They had withdrawn completely. No evidence remaining of creatures Park Service records refused to acknowledge, yet I felt their continued presence, watching from distance as humans reclaimed disputed territory. Before boarding the helicopter, I placed my ranger hat on the boundary marker they had constructed. Acknowledgement of territorial claim. Respect between species, separated by evolutionary paths, but united in fundamental understanding. As rotors lifted us skyward, I glimpsed movement at forest edge. 3 dark figures observing our departure. Not hiding anymore. Standing as equals in their domain. I understood with perfect clarity. They had never been legend or folklore or campfire story. They had always been there, watching from evolutionary shadows as humans claimed wilderness never truly ours. The official report would document bear activity, structural damage from weather, and psychological strain from isolation. Science and bureaucracy erasing unexplainable truth with comfortable fiction. But I knew what I had seen, what I had communicated with, what watched from ancient forests when humans ventured beyond boundaries of established knowledge. And somewhere in Alaska's deepest wilderness, they continued watching, waiting for the next human to discover what I had learned at tremendous cost. We had never been alone. 6 months after extraction from Taklit, I sit in headquarters' fluorescent-lit administrative office, processing equipment requisitions and filing incident reports. The transition from wilderness isolation to bureaucratic confinement represents its own peculiar torture. Officially, I suffered environmental stress response requiring temporary reassignment pending psychological evaluation. My field notes were classified, photographs archived in restricted access databases. Benjamin Schaefer's death certificate lists animal attack, ursine predator as cause. Science and bureaucracy combining to preserve comfortable paradigms. Abernathy visits occasionally, bringing coffee and conversation deliberately vague when others might overhear. Her research continues under innocuous titles like Adaptive Behaviors in Unclassified North American Mammals. We both understand the careful linguistic dance required when discussing subjects officially non-existent. Your hair sample, she mentioned during her last visit. Results came back inconclusive, officially. Unofficially, genetic markers showed primate characteristics combined with unknown sequences. The sample disappeared from the lab 3 days later. Convenient, I observed. Pattern recognition suggests involvement beyond standard bureaucratic procedures, she replied carefully. Interest in these specimens extends beyond scientific curiosity. Translation: someone powerful doesn't want evidence preserved. Winter approaches again. Through office windows I watch snow accumulating on headquarters' manicured grounds, so different from the wild expanse of Primrose Lake. I dream of dark shapes moving through trees, of knocking patterns against cabin walls, of eyes watching with intelligence science refuses to acknowledge. Monroe visits my desk weekly, evaluating readiness for potential field reactivation. His expression suggests internal conflict between administrative mandates and genuine concern. "The new ranger at Toklat?" I asked during his last evaluation. "Any unusual reports?" Something flickered across his features, recognition perhaps, or concealed knowledge. "Station's been decommissioned, budget cuts, areas designated wilderness preserve now, no human presence authorized. Territory ceded, acknowledgement of boundaries negotiated through unorthodox diplomacy. I wonder if my hat still marks that boundary line where species reached fragile understanding. Last week a package arrived through internal mail, no sender indicated, routing information deliberately obscured. Inside, a small carved wooden figure depicting a creature neither fully human nor animal. Abernathy's work, I suspect, though she denies involvement. With the carving came a topographical map marking unsanctioned ranger outposts throughout Alaska's deepest wilderness, areas where official records document unusual predator activity, territories where boundaries between species remain contested or negotiated through means science hasn't categorized. "Considering field reassignment?" Monroe asked today, noting the map spread across my desk. "Just studying terrain," I answered carefully. "Maintaining skills." He nodded with suspicious understanding. "Some regions benefit from minimal human presence. Natural balance requires respecting established territories." Tonight, as headquarters empties for weekend exodus, I examined transfer request forms with growing resolution. Not Toklat, that boundary stands established, but other regions marked on Abernathy's map, where similar encounters remain undocumented by those capable of understanding their significance. Science advances through observation of unexplained phenomena. Some truths require witnesses willing to venture beyond comfortable paradigms into territories where humans were never meant to be unquestioned masters. I complete the transfer request, specifying remote outpost marking boundary between acknowledged wilderness and something else entirely. Where others might flee from unexplained shadows, I find purpose in documentation, in communication, in understanding intelligence evolved along paths parallel to our own. Through office windows, darkness gathers across parking lot. In that darkness, memory recreates 3 distinct knocks against cabin walls, 3 impacts acknowledging presence across species boundaries. Communication established between intelligences science claims cannot exist. They remain out there, watching from evolutionary shadows as humans venture into territories never truly conquerable. Tonight, I pack equipment for return to wilderness where comfortable certainties dissolve against evidence too compelling to ignore. Some truths demand witnesses. Some boundaries require acknowledgement. Some intelligence deserves recognition, regardless of forms it inhabits. The transfer request form bears single destination, checkpoint north, 163 miles beyond last acknowledged ranger station, where reports document destroyed structures, massive tracks in wilderness snow, and distinctive knocking patterns against cabin walls during longest winter nights. Where truth awaits those with courage to acknowledge what watches from ancient forests when science looks away. I am Kayani, the one who walks far, and I'm going back.